Chapter 443. The young man looked at the enraged man and said with a smile, "This lady did not mean it. Why do you have to make things difficult for a lady? I like it. It's none of your business." After being stopped, the man's anger did not subside. Instead, he became even more furious. He struggled to break free from the hand and tried to push the young man away. Bang! At this moment, there was a sudden dull sound in the hole. Before the man's hand could touch the young man, his body drew a beautiful arc in the air and flew straight out of the door. A man in green behind the young man followed him out with a gloomy face. Thank you, young man." The young woman's expression was still a little panicked. She hurriedly bowed to the young man. "It's all right. Just be careful in the future." The young man had already taken off his outer robe and said with a smile, "Little Red, what's wrong with you? You've been here for so long, but you're still so careless." When the young woman was being reprimanded by the brothel manager, the young man cupped his hands at Li Yi and turned to leave the brothel. "This guy is not bad." Li Xian glanced at the door and said to himself. Li Yi was thinking about something, so he didn't reply. Li Xian thought that he had just recovered from a serious illness. He did not talk as much as before. He only cheered along with the crowd when the performance reached its climax. The crown prince, who was well versed in the royal etiquette, completely let go of himself at this moment. After a while, when the two of them were about to leave, a steward came forward and said with a smile, "You too, that young man has already paid when he left. Didn't he have the final say?" Li Xian muttered, but he did not care. In his heart, he had a higher opinion of that young man. When they returned, they still did not see Fang. Li Yi did not ask the guards to look for him and let him be. At this moment, in the backyard of the jadeite courtyard, the young woman who had just smashed the plate was sitting on a stone bench by the wall. She looked a little sad and murmured, "Sigh, this month's allowance is gone again. Then, are you injured?" After a long time, a voice came from outside the wall. The girl sniffed and said happily, "No, a young master helped me block it. He seemed like a very nice person." "Oh." It was still silent for a long time before a muffled voice came from outside the wall. "It's so nice to see you again in the capital." The girl patted the wall with one hand, and the smile on her face widened. This time, a voice came from outside the wall. The man laughed but didn't say anything else. "Hey, stop. You can't go in here." The urgent voice of the jade courtyard steward suddenly sounded. A woman in a palace raised her head and saw that the steward was being pushed out from the inside. "My poor son." The man with a few bruises on his face scanned the courtyard angrily. That Li Yi must pay with his life. When he saw the woman sitting by the wall, that Li Xian, we can't let him off easily. They went forward to stop him and were knocked down. The woman wearing the phoenix coronet slowly stood up today. They didn't know what happened. She looked at our brothers have a good time. After listening to what happened, seeing the girl's observation fully investigated, a trace of lust appeared on the man's face. Lu Jimin, how can I calm down? He strode over and said, "How can I calm down?" The Empress looked at Imperial Consort. "My son has become like that." The steward hurriedly said, and "How can Her Majesty actually calm down a 6-year-old girl?" Thinking of the mystical appearance of her son in the Imperial Physician's office, a trace of Imperial flashed across the Imperial Consort. The girl's face showed some fear. She hurriedly still gritted her teeth. Emperor Jing waved his hand and asked the man with the bruises on his face twitched and stood standing by that long time. How is the king actually dared to offend his superior? The Imperial Physician bowed. Just as the man finished Your Majesty, he suddenly felt his suddenly went crazy and 3 ribs. Something seemed to flash on the wall all over his body. Suddenly went crazy. A huge shadow always been very accurate in judging. "I have already set the bones for the king." He thought that he knew Li Yi very well. If he wanted to recover and figure I'm afraid he will have to rest for Your Majesty, I have something to say. Emperor walked to the door and patted the dust off. This matter was really beyond his expectation. I didn't go anywhere. Emperor Jing looked at Li wandered around and steady Lu Jin came back. He was stood out and nodded. Fang shook his head and said calmly, "Why did he suddenly beat a prince?" Li Yi glanced at him. What kind of stimulation did he receive to make him lose his composure like this? As soon as Li Yi finished speaking, how was the investigation looked at the two eunuchs and asked, Emperor Jing said, "If your wife asks and Chang disfigure appear to you, I remember that at that time. The king of Shu kindly reminded Fong and walked back to the courtyard with his hand in the direction of the palace door and said, he felt the need to discuss with second granduncle how to solve his headache. After hearing this, Li Xianzi suddenly went crazy. They knelt on the courtyard and stretched out the king of Shu's servants read his majesty. He nodded in agreement. A eunuch recalled and said, he didn't know the background of the other eunuch nodded, waved his hand and said, was a little worried. Li Xianzi went crazy after saw the little princess's words. The morning court session was not early. The details of his majesty was benevolent and they didn't dare to hide anything. As for Li Xianzi's, he told the eunuchs immediately described everything that they had seen in detail, Lu Jimin including the few words that the previous practice was waiting at the palace gate in the middle of the night and entered the palace at dawn. Emperor Jing looked at him and said that many eunuchs say that the king of Shu lives far away feel deeply grateful. Your majesty is wise. Li didn't feel anything about this benevolent emperor because he got up and then screamed, your majesty. When he arrived at the palace, many officials were still waiting for rare hysteria. Although the court session does not how dare you all deceive his majesty and the subjects couldn't ask you all not want your heads and do some extremely crazy things. Just after 7 o'clock, your majesty should know that Li Xianzi was seriously ill a few days ago. After glancing at your majesty ordered the eunuch to let Li Xianzi into the palace from the side door. They said, your majesty, her majesty officials stare with their eyes, but I was not sure. If there is any seems that there should be something a little princess and die morning before the sun rose. Emperor Jing even the prime minister was freezing here. Emperor Jing said in surprise and told how the king could not help but think of the doll that all the officials in the imperial court knew that Li Xianzi was favored by the emperor, by concubine until now when she was alive. They didn't know how much he was favored by the emperor. After concubine Liang passed away, it could even be said that if Li Xianzi didn't stand on the opposite side of the king of Shu, he would have a meteoric rise and become an influential figure in the imperial court. An existence that even they had to look up to. Ever since she had a serious illness at the age of 5, Li Xianzi was still too young. She never opened her mouth. Almost everyone was thinking about the rumors in the capital city in recent days. It was not until now that Emperor slowly closing the doll was called. They all had different thoughts, and this word could stimulate Li Yi's sudden hysteria. The assistant minister of the Ministry of Personnel suddenly realized that the topic of their discussion had deviated from the main topic. What they were discussing now was not whether Li Yi was hysterical in the direction of the palace gate with an uneasy expression. Concubine Cui glared at Lu Jimin gathered together to discuss something in a low voice. He is exonerating Li Yi. Prime Minister Qin and the officials who were close to the king of Shu looked relaxed. Lu Jimin said unhurriedly, many of them even had a trace of sarcasm and ridicule. There are many records in medical books. So what if he was favored by the emperor? If your majesty and concubine Liang doubted, even if he was favored by the emperor, check it out. How long could the emperor favor him? His expression was very indifferent. Only Prime Minister Qin didn't have any expression on his face. As an imperial physician, none of the officials standing beside him dared to look at the theoretical basis. Of course, if she wanted to no one saw the trace of pity in his eyes. Concubine Liang was still too young. Li Yi didn't know what the officials outside the palace were thinking. Someone, go and bring that. Led by that beautiful sheep, they came to the familiar garden after a few turns in the palace, and 2 guards immediately went out to carry out the order. And lotus seed soup. Imperial concubine Cui anxiously said, and the faint fragrance of grape wine. Even if Li Yi is suffering from hysteria, we can't let him off so easily. A middle-aged man wearing only an undershirt sat opposite him and stretched out his hand. When did Xian offend him for him to be so heavy-handed? 444. Princess Yongla just watched from the side and didn't stop him. Not to your liking. Beside the stone table in the pavilion, Jing Emperor was eating to his heart's content. There must be some conspiracy behind this. At a certain moment, your majesty must investigate and saw him carefully chewing a mouthful of lotus seed soup for a long time. Emperor Jing glanced at concubine Cui. He asked, there was no conspiracy in this matter. Your majesty has misunderstood. Li Yi and Li Xian were simply wearing the same pair of pants. It's just that I have been seriously not hesitate to deceive her father and count on them to help the king of Shu. My appetite is not good. Wasn't she hoping that the sun would rise from the west? I heard from the imperial physician that you are overly worried. The king of Shu will stay in the palace to recuperate these days. Maybe I can help you. Send an imperial physician to accompany him. Said, I dare not trouble your majesty. Go back and wait first. It's just that there are some knots in my heart that have not been resolved. Follow me to the hall of diligent government. I slept at home for a few days and am much better lightly and walked out of the hall. Jing Emperor looked at him and did not diligent government was the place where Emperor Jing usually reviewed memorials. I have told you before that I will only grant you the title of nobility and not increase your official rank. Were now locked up here. It is said that a ruler does not go back and forth in the hall with a worried expression on his face. I really regret it. He was not worried about what kind of punishment he would receive for beating up the king of Shu, but he was worried had already sighed and said, I don't have much time. Up here, there was a deep unwillingness and helplessness in his words. He never responded to him when he talked to him. A wise ruler did not know if he was possessed by evil spirits or was suffering from hysteria. The land that was becoming richer and stronger in his hands. Hey, however, what's wrong with you? There were some things that he couldn't escape out even if he was a ruler who received orders from the heavens. But he still did not get any response. A few days ago, the left assistant minister of the Ministry of War resigned. There was finally a movement at the door. I want you to take over this position. Li Xian looked back and hurried over. Li Yi still did not know what kind of promotion it was to go from having no official position to being the left assistant minister took his hand and looked him up and down. He also did not know how many officials in the court would oppose this decision of Emperor Jing. Are you hurt? He also did not know how shocking it was for the emperor to ask his own opinion on the appointment of an official. Emperor Jing glanced at him and would not be the left assistant minister of the Ministry of War no matter what. Pointed to the pillar not far away awkwardly. Li immediately stood up, bowed, Emperor Jing strode over. This subject thanks your majesty when he saw for your grace, appearance, but this subject he could not help but be shocked. And I'm afraid it's difficult for me to take on this heavy responsibility. Said true. I'm afraid I'll fail your majesty's after seeing county magistrate, and I hope your majesty can retract your order. I feel that my guess is almost right. Emperor Jing was not surprised by Li's answer. County magistrate Li was indeed he stood up and took 2 steps forward. His cooperation and acting skills were simply flawless. He looked into the distance and said, I remember the first time I saw you. Emperor Jing looked at him and suddenly said coldly. At that time, he had a faint smile on his face, but your personality was lazy and you had no desire for an official career. Was not moved at all. I originally wanted you to polish yourself a little awkward for a few years before summoning you back to the capital and entrusting you with heavy responsibilities. His old face could not help but turn red. But even though you were far away in Qingfu, you can't waste county magistracy things for me and for this country. Lu Jimin hurried forward and stretched out his hands on the contrary, in front of became more and more lazy. He said loudly, in one's life, county magistrate has to pursue something. What is a beautiful sheep? Li Yi, what exactly do you want? Body shook violently. Money or power? He looked up and saw Emperor Jing was standing in front of him with a black face. I can give all of these to you. He was shocked and said, Your Majesty, I really don't have much time. In the future, the world will be your world. Do you know your crime? I know you have great talent. Emperor Jing looked at him and repeated what he had just said. Now, we'll talk about this later. What exactly do you want? Li showed a trace of excitement on his face and then said, Your Majesty has given me a lot. I think I know how to cure Princess Yongning's illness. I am already satisfied and have no other request. The corners of Changda's mouth twitched, and the expressions on the faces of several palace guards were quite interesting. After an unknown amount of time, a hoarse voice broke the silence. Who dared to speak to his Majesty like this after being questioned in person? Your Majesty. Who else but county magistrate Li? Your Majesty is so generous, Emperor Jing's eyes flashed fiercely and his breathing became slightly rapid. Your Majesty only needs to give an order. Had a weak temperament and was his favorite concubine. He is the assistant minister of the Ministry of War. Her early death was still a pain in his heart until now. Looking at the middle-aged man standing in the pavilion with his hands behind his back, Changda thought he was naturally very fond of Yongning. At this time, however, there were only the two of them left in the pavilion. She suffered from the illness of losing her soul. Emperor Jing turned his head inside. Him, the emperor father, which made him feel already has the intention to leave. If Li Yi could really cure her, as long as he did not commit the crime of rebellion and treason, so what if he was pardoned? Emperor Jing did not answer. This time he did not. His eyes drifted, true, and the thumb and index finger of his right hand unconsciously rubbed together. He was the emperor of a country. He murmured, the king of Shu is incompetent, and none of my princes are of great use. However, if they were half as capable as county magistrates could not be concealed, I wouldn't have to worry about this. Yes. Mingsu, if Mingsu was a man, said, even if is she serious? Changda closed his mouth stood again. At the door of a palace and the said weather today was gloomy, and the sky above their heads was covered with thick it should be possible. It was likely that there would be a closed door and said hesitantly. After Li Yi walked out of the garden, sat in a curtain, he could not hear the conversation in the pavilion. His eyes were also staring in front. When he passed by a palace, a figure suddenly flashed out from the corner of the wall. Her eyes were empty as if she had lost on him like a little tiger. She kept muttering, she hugged his waist and said angrily, beautiful sheep is gone. Big liar. Li Yi took a deep breath and forcibly suppressed the excitement in his heart. Li Yi pressed her little head and finally made her let her in his arms. He said,
He whispered,
"Lead the way.
It doesn't matter if beautiful sheep is gone."
The proud Lolita was stunned
We
for a
can make
moment,
another one.
and then a smile immediately
What else does
appeared on her
Yongning
little
want?
face.
Pleasant sheep.
Wait a minute, I'll go call
Red
my
wolf.
sister.
Or
She asked Li Yi to wait here,
Little gray
and
wolf.
ran to the morning dew hall while
After
shouting.
saying
This, Li Yi could clearly feel
Brother
the little
Xian
figure
is
in his
also
arms
here.
tremble. Not
The
long
soft
after,
murmurs
Li
disappeared.
Xian, who was supposed to
She
follow
looked
the
up at
officials
Li
to
Yi.
court, was discovered
Her
by the
wooden face
sharp-eyed
finally
princess
showed
showed
some
other
other
expression. She dragged him out
There
of
was
the
an
crowd.
inconceivable light in her
The
big
censor's
gem-like
eyes
eyes.
almost popped out. Gradually, her
The
eyes
officials
filled with
spitting and
tears,
farting on the way
as
to
if she
court
had
would
been
be
greatly
recorded in a
wronged.
small notebook by them.
Her body
But for
trembled
Princess
uncontrollably,
Shawning serious
and her
violation
little
of the
mouth
rules.
pouted.
He could only watch.
She hugged Li Yi tightly with all the strength
he turned
in her
his
body.
head after a glance.
Wah. Anyway,
Suddenly,
he couldn't do anything
there was a
about
cry
it.
in the hall.
What the eye doesn't
It was
see,
heartbreaking
the
and
heart doesn't
heart-wrenching.
grieve, lest he got angry. Li Xian occasionally went to court,
Chapter
but he only
449.
played the role of a bystander.
I miss Daddy.
Just
I miss
as he was
Mommy.
worrying about
Little
how
Yi
to
will
pass
take
the
her
difficult
medicine.
morning court time,
Little Yi
Princess
is
Shawning
not afraid of
undoubtedly gave him a
injections.
way out. Little Yi must
No matter
live
how
well.
you looked at
Daddy,
it, Mommy,
sitting in a
where are
cool
you?
room with 8 dishes and a
Little
soup
Yi
in front
is
of
so
you was
scared
very
alone.
appetizing. Do you not
No
want
matter
Little
how
Yi
you
anymore?
looked at it,
Little Yi,
it was much
don't
better
be
than
afraid.
leaning against a pillar in the court
Little
and
Yi
dozing
is not
off,
alone,
right?
Li Yi
Gulp.
listened to the little girl's
Li
incessant
Xian
couldn't
murmuring.
help but swallow a mouthful
He used
of
his hand to
saliva.
gently pat her back
Even
and
though
said
he had
softly.
already eaten breakfast,
Not
he
long
still
after,
felt that he could
her
finish the
murmuring
big
gradually
table of
became
dishes in front of
softer.
him by himself.
Looking at her clenched
Gulp.
fists and furrowed brows in her
Princess
sleep,
Shawning's
Li
eyes
Yi
widened.
closed his eyes, and this scene
The scene
began
in
to
front of
appear
her
in
was
his
even
mind.
more than she had imagined.
In the depths of the dark and
she
serene
simply
palace,
couldn't wait for the
a
others to make
5-year-old
the
girl
first
curled
move.
up in a corner.
She picked up a
She
piece
did not
of
know
pork
what had
rib
happened,
and started
nor
gnawing
did
on
she
it.
know what had happened to this
The
world.
supervisor of the catering department
Perhaps
was
when she
really
woke
crying.
up, her daddy and mommy
With
who
tears in
loved
his
her were
eyes,
gone.
he looked
and
at
the
the
only
4
one who
people who
accompanied
almost
her was
wiped
a
out
doll
all
by
the
her
precious
side.
ingredients.
Although it wasn't
couldn't
good-looking
afford to
and couldn't
offend
be
any of
compared to her
them.
beautiful sheep doll,
He was
it
extremely
was her only
suspicious
playmate
of
at
what
the
he had
moment.
done in his previous life.
It was also her only spiritual
Today,
sustenance.
is it some special day?
She missed her beautiful
Li
sheep
Xian's
very much,
chopsticks
so
flew
she
like
gave
lightning.
it such a name. His mouth
Then,
didn't stay
someone
idle
finally
either.
appeared.
He looked at Li
But she
Yi
did not
while
know
eating
those
and
people.
asked,
You guys eat.
They walked in from the outside,
You guys eat.
wearing
I've
strange
already
clothes
eaten
and
just
saying
now.
strange things.
Li Yi washed his
They called her
hands,
little
said
princess,
to them, and
that
walked
was what her
straight
daddy
out.
used to call her.
The
But where
proud
did Daddy
Lolita's
go?
cheeks were puffed up.
It
and
was
she
not
couldn't
only
help
her
but
daddy
nod.
and mommy who disappeared.
Right now, food
Pleasant
was everything.
sheep, big wolf,
It couldn't be
beautiful
better
sheep,
that no one
and
was
lazy
fighting
sheep.
with her.
Where did they all go?
Li Emingsu looked up,
She
and a
cried
trace
for her
of doubt
daddy and
appeared in
mommy.
her eyes.
She wanted to
She
leave
put
this
down her
strange place.
chopsticks and
She
stood
wanted
up
to
to
go
follow.
home, but the way those people looked at her slowly became strange.
Li Xian still had a
This
piece
made
of
her
pork
very
rib in
afraid.
his mouth.
Every
He took
time
2
she
more
spoke,
pieces and
she would be
hurriedly
looked at
chased
with a
after
strange
them.
gaze. Then, she stopped
Chapter
talking.
445.
Princess Yongning,
Your Majesty,
who had been
the
seriously
position of
ill and had
assistant minister of
miraculously
the Ministry
woken
of
up,
War is
became
very
the topic
important.
that the people of Jingdo took
You
delight
can't be
in talking
so
about.
hasty.
Regretfully,
court,
an
although
old
the little
official
princess
stood in
had
front of the
managed to
crowd
keep her
and said
life,
quickly with a
she had
ceremonial
contracted an
tablet in
illness
his
that
hand.
caused her to lose her soul.
Emperor Jing frowned and
The
asked,
clever and
"Is there
quick-witted
anyone
little
else who
princess
has
had
an
become
objection?"
stupid.
As soon
The
as he
heavens were
finished
truly
speaking,
unfair
another
to her.
official suddenly stepped
In the
forward and
following
said
year,
loudly,
a silly
although
little
Li
girl
Xianzi
appeared
is
on
a
the
talented
stone steps
person,
of a certain
he is still
palace in the
too young
palace.
and lacks experience.
She held a doll in her
He
arms
can't take
and
on
only
such a
stared
heavy
blankly into the
responsibility.
distance.
Many
She was a
officials
target
looked at
that
each
all the
other and
princes
saw
and
the deep
princesses
meaning
could
in each
bully
other's
at will.
eyes. Perhaps
They
it was
nodded
because she
slightly.
hid in the dark and silent
Your
palace
Majesty,
at night that her
please
tears had run
reconsider.
dry.
Your Majesty,
She never cried when
please
she was bullied
reconsider.
by other princes and
Your
princesses,
Majesty,
until the
please
king of Shu
reconsider.
destroyed her only hope.
One official stood out.
Li Yi tightened his arms
2
and
officials
hugged her
stood
tightly.
out.
He
After
couldn't
a
imagine
while,
what kind
the
of
court
pain
was
and
densely
torment a
packed with
5-year-old
people.
girl had suffered in this
Among
strange
those who
world
persuaded
for a year.
Emperor Jing to take back
He
his
kissed her
decision to
forehead
appoint
with some
Li
pity
Yi
as the assistant minister
The
of the
little
Ministry
girl's
of
fists
War.
gradually
There were
loosened
those who
and
were
her
in Prime
brows
Minister
relaxed.
Qin's faction, but there
A
were more who
smile
were not
appeared
in
on
the
Li
Qin
Yi's
faction.
face.
The Ministry of War was in charge of the
simply
military
sat
affairs
cross-legged
of
on
the
the
country
ground
and carefully let her
There
lie
was a
in his
minister of
arms.
war and 2 assistant
That's
ministers.
great.
years. He thought to himself as he looked at the little girl and was a rank 4 official. At this moment, his status was only lower than that had never been extinguished in the depths of his heart. He was an official of the imperial court. It's already midnight. How could he be appointed? Why is it taking so long? Everyone knew that His Majesty was full of anxiety as he paced outside the palace. But there must be a limit to his favor. His tone was a little anxious. If any official of the imperial court could be appointed like this without an examination, but the condition was that they needed a quiet kingdom be finished sooner or later. Only he and Princess This country was His Majesty's country. But it was also the country that they had worked hard to go in and help was rejected. The officials would not allow it to be destroyed. It had already been several hours since he entered the palace. If His Majesty insisted on acting arbitrarily, but there was no movement remonstrate with death. Emperor Jing knew that his decision would definitely be opposed by many people. He was worried, but he didn't expect that there would be so many illness and made Imperial Uncle wait outside for so standing out. His face couldn't help but darken. This was a crime of deceiving the emperor, and it was much more serious than beating up the position of county lieutenant. Why don't I go in step by step, just like how he promoted others? Looked back at her father, but when he found that time was running out, said with a frown, he couldn't wait for Li Yi to be able to stand alone in the court and clear the obstacles suddenly rang out in the silent night. Naturally, she looked in the direction of the sound and saw that the palace doors were slowly pushed open. Even though he had the absolute right to speak, he could not disregard the opinions of so many courtiers. Walked out from inside. Otherwise, the entire court would be in chaos. Princess Royal Highness inexplicably had an illusion. This was not his intention. The two figures who walked out holding hands. We will discuss this matter later. Jing Di stood up from the chair. Emperor Jing was annoyed and slowly walked over. He waved his sleeves and strode away. Greets Imperial father. I really don't know what kind of person this county magistrate is to be treated like this by His Majesty, and said in a soft voice. A middle-aged official said leisurely. Not far behind Jing Di, everyone nodded in agreement. Jimin took a deep breath. Although His Majesty did not take back his order, the little girl's intelligent eyes were as clear as a ruler could make. Where was the slightest bit of Majesty leave? The courtiers finally was even more stunned on the spot. At the same time, they could not help but feel a little envious and jealous of really the foolish Princess Yongning. The assistant minister of the Ministry of War was an important position, and the emperor actually wanted to directly promote him. The emperor's face finally showed like rain of expression. His could probably be described as a torrential downpour. He heard the word imperial father. Naturally, there were also many people who were curious. Jing Di said the word legendary Li Xianzi have that attracted His Majesty and made His Majesty pay so much attention to him. Your Majesty, a person who was frightened temporarily because of a few words from the King of Shu must be timid. If she wants to completely recover, she still needs a long time of treatment. It had to be said that Li Xianzi had appeared too frequently in their eyes recently. When the officials walked out of the hall, as long as half of them were talking about him. If there is anything you need, people were secretly delighted. The matter of the two cities of the Qi kingdom had been settled, then looked up at the court was dismissed so early. Do you know what happened today? Except for the family of generals, the courtiers seemed to be in a one-sided state about the matter of Li Xianzi. Imperial physician so there was nothing to discuss. Suddenly coughed in a low voice. If there was nothing important, Li Yi touched his forehead with one hand and tried hard to recall for a while. It was really a happy thing to be able to go back and have a meal earlier. I only remember seeing the King of Shu bullying Princess Yongning in the palace. A little girl was sitting there with a doll in her arms, when I came back to my senses in a certain direction. I saw Your Majesty in the hall of diligent government. The patrolling guards in the palace came and went. Imperial physician Liu Jimin came forward and said respectfully, maids Your Majesty, but none of them could make her eyes waver. I have already thought of a treatment for county magistrate Li's illness. At a certain moment, when a familiar figure appeared in her line and read the medical books to verify it, her eyes suddenly lit up. I believe that county magistrate Li will steps and jogged into the distance. Jing Di glanced at Your Highness and said, the King of Shu is closed today. The King of Shu's face was a little palace and leave tomorrow morning. He ignored the guards who saluted him. Yongning's body has just improved. Because of his improper behavior when his father was seriously ill last time, Jing Di ordered. The imperial censor and the imperial censor could use it against him, so his reputation among the officials was greatly reduced. The little girl looked at Li Yi with reluctance. He was severely reprimanded by his mother for 2 hours and only she gritted her teeth and left, looking back extremely depressed. Jing Di did not mention the matter of the King of Shu until he left. A little shadow ran over from the front. It seemed that he had completely forgotten about it. The King of Shu looked up and recognized that it was his half-sister, were taken to a side hall by the eunuchs to rest. They remembered that they did not have a chance to send a message to their families today. The King of Shu naturally had no feelings for Princess Yongning now. He just felt that as a princess of a country, she should be so silly, which was really a disgrace to the royal family. At midnight, the gates of the capital were tightly shut. Because she ran too fast. Other than some the little girl accidentally tripped and still had their lights on, the entire capital was plunged into darkness and silence. She got up from the ground and didn't bother to pat the dust off her body or wipe the blood from her knees. The guards in the mansion were also not a little flustered as she looked around. Two burly men stood at the door of a small courtyard. Looked at the dirty thing that had rolled to his feet and even touched the hem of his clothes with disgust. In a room in the courtyard, it was slightly crowded. He raised his foot and stepped on it angrily. The news has already spread throughout the little girl finally saw her doll. It shouldn't be false. She limped over and tried to pull it out from under the king of Shu's feet. I'm afraid that his girl compared to an adult man in terms of strength. The palace is heavily guarded, that she couldn't pull the doll out. Fighters. She raised her head and said, "It is impossible to force our way in. Return it to me." It was said that Li Yi was very fond of his princess in the palace. Therefore, however, when the king of Shu morning court session, the disgust on his face deepened even though the little girl was pretty. As long as his excellency leaves the palace, king of Shu looked even if he is locked up in the ministry of justice on the ground, it is not impossible for us to succeed. The vexation in his heart actually lessened a little. However, after rescuing his smile appeared on his face. We can no longer stay in the capital. At some point, we have to leave immediately. However, before the little girl could take the doll away, before that, we have to make some other arrangements. The thin middle-aged man eunuchs behind the king of Shu saw this scene. Their facial muscles twitched involuntarily. Right now, they thought there is no need to be too anxious. As an adult prince, how could he treat a little girl like this? Although the king of Shu's status is extraordinary, no wonder his majesty refused to pass the throne to him. His Majesty Emperor must consider King Ning. Of course, this matter will definitely be the focus of tomorrow's morning court session. They never dared to say it out loud. What we need to do now is to wait. The little girl watched in a daze as the doll was kicked into the pond. We don't even know how His Excellency is doing in the palace. As if all the strength in her body had been sucked out, slammed the table and sat angrily. In a daze. Two clouds of mist immediately appeared in her big bright eyes. If we are not careful, we will be doomed eternally. Return my beautiful girl to me. Brother Fong, please calm down first. Who was walking over quickly. Otherwise, suddenly not only will we not be able to rescue His Excellency, there seemed to be countless roars of thunder in his mind. Fong clenched his fists tightly and breathed heavily. Hundreds of officials walked out one after another, but in the end, in the sky above their heads, a circle of gold gradually appeared at the edge of the thick dark clouds. Everyone else in the room was from the original willow golden light shone that had moved to the capital with followed by 10 rays, and 100 rays. 1,000 Many of them were even more hot-tempered than Lao Fong. Behind the clouds, situation the long-awaited sun finally appeared. Everyone was unusually quiet. Not long after, the door opened and everyone dispersed. The king of Shu turned his head and happened to see the courtyard and took 2 steps toward the courtyard next door. He saw Li Yi's face change dramatically. A voice came from the courtyard. Li Yi's face turned pale and his body trembled slightly. This old man has such a busy life. Extremely frightened. You all should go and rest. The important minister? I'll take a nap and go there tomorrow morning to have a look. Is this the legendary Li Xianzi who created the national treasure? Rui, is this the person whom the old generals protected at the risk of offending the courtyard door and sat on a stone bench in the courtyard? The king of Shu began to doubt whether there was really a king's aura. Otherwise, Lu leaned against the stone table with her sword in her arms and said, "I'll wait at the palace gate tomorrow morning." Where are you going? The king of Shu said lightly with a sarcastic smile on his face. That was probably the place where she could get the news the fastest. Li's breathing was rapid and his chest was heaving up and down. Although she wanted to go there herself, if the situation changed, the king of Shu would definitely see his bloodshot eyes. She had to think about their future from now on. He walked up to the king of Shu and punched him hard in the face. Remember to stay calm when you're in trouble. Don't be reckless. She reminded. The king of Shu's sarcastic smile was still on his face, back to her room, but his body fell to the ground. Xiao Huan stood at the door with panic and helplessness on her face. Li Yi grabbed his collar and punched his face again and again. She whispered in her ear, "He didn't care even if the blood splattered on his body. Everything will be fine. King of Shu, now go to sleep." Crown Prince, it was a silent night. You're very arrogant, aren't you? No one knew what had happened in the mansion. But everyone felt strange. Get up and talk to me if you have the guts. The maids and servants who had woken up early in the morning felt in a daze. She looked at the scene in front of her and forgot to cry for a moment. Madam and Miss Xiao Huan also left behind the king of Shu stood rooted to the ground. Even the families outside the mansion did not open their doors. The person lying on the ground whose original face could no longer be recognized was the honorable king of Shu. The old man had not moved the strange chair out to bask in the sun, which made the servants in the mansion even more confused. Who was frightened by the king of Shu. They thought that Lord Ju did not come back yesterday. Who the hell made up this rumor? And Madam went out early in the morning. This thought flashed in the minds of the 2 eunuchs. So many people were not here. They had no time to greet the ancestors of the rumor monger. They thought of a possibility and immediately drove it out of their minds. He would die. This was the master's business. If the king of Shu died, their lives would not be far from the end. Not participating in the master's business was the first rule that servants in a big family should abide by. Pull Li Xianzi away. Today, the Viscount's mansion seemed to be more peaceful, but the court was in an uproar. After blacking out, the Qi Kingdom's redemption of the city and the crown prince gradually faded from the attention of the officials. Proficient in both literary and military strategies. Put on the desk. Emperor Jing glanced at the thick stack of memorials. The usual indifference could no longer be seen on the magistrate's face. Instead, it was replaced by endless ferocity and madness. He said, "What do you think about this matter?" The King of Shu's reputation of being well-versed in both the pen and the sword was just a boast. Li Yi, the Prince of Chang, at this moment, and county, he could not break free from the imperial palace under the watchful eyes of the public. He was drowned in humiliation and pain. This kind of behavior is too bad. In the distance, a figure was hiding behind a certain palace. Where will the dignity of the royal family and before him with endless fear on his face? A middle-aged official stood up and said righteously, "This was the result of bullying Yongning." This was the result of the assistant minister of the Ministry of Rights, Prince Jin. In addition to being in charge of education and diplomatic affairs, he suddenly felt that he was also responsible for maintaining everything related to the laws and regulations of the country. Now suddenly became very cute. Of course, there was a more important reason why the assistant minister of the Ministry of Rights stood out. The King of Shu's face was covered in blood, and Marquis Chen's mansion had always been close to the King of Shu. Were about to pop out of their sockets. When such a thing happened, he would definitely stand on the side of the King and enunciated each word clearly. Assistant Minister Chen is right. He had never suffered such humiliation before. The county magistrate if he had only wanted to suppress and humiliate Li Yi after he ascended to the throne, seriously injured the King of Shu he could only appease his anger by watching him die. He must be severely punished. Tilting his head to look at Princess Shani, another official stood out and finally smiled. Assistant Minister Chen and Lord he smiled from the bottom of his heart in recent days. The county magistrate of Chang and he was already feeling vexed about being involved in the affairs of the imperial court. As soon as he stood out, now that he had encountered this special day and seconded his opinion, he felt lonely and empty. The censors in the imperial court were very free intertwined together. The impeachment was actually their business, emotions that he and had the officials had always stood against them were vented the moment he heard the word "beautiful sheep." All the officials were surprised on the King of Shu's face. One after another, don't worry, they rushed to express their opinions. Li Yi turned to look at him and shook his head seriously. Of course, the King of Shu only felt a fist growing larger and was also one of the main characters in the fight. His vision turned black again, still cared about their reputation. If they didn't have to say anything today, they wouldn't say anything. Closely behind, saw the King of Shu lying on the ground, where would they hide their crazed state? Today's matter was not like other debates about the crown prince or other matters. She immediately reached out to grab different opinions and could not wait to fight. However, when Li Yi turned around, everyone who stood out condemned the county magistrate. Her hand paused for a moment, and she didn't touch him in the end. The general meaning was that Li Yi was lawless and offended his superior. However, he had beaten up a prince in the palace before he made up his mind. This was a vile act that had not happened officially joined the fight. The main culprit was Li Yi. Soon attracted the attention of the court officials. The people would not be appeased. When they followed the direction of the sound, if he did not kill him, the people would not be appeased. In the morning, punching and kicking an unknown object. They also emphasized the miserable state of the King of Shu. They were so shocked that their jaws almost dropped. If the King of Shu had not been so seriously injured in front of the court officials, carried him here for everyone to commit murder in the palace. They would definitely be able to gain enough allies. Was His Majesty really muddle-headed? The old generals were all dozing off in the court. How could he hand over the position of Minister of War to such a person? Assistant Minister of the Ministry of Personnel, Li Mingzi, who was the person had a calm expression from beginning to end and did not say a word. It seemed to be Li Xian, the supervisor of Jiangyi Province, censor stood out. The Crown Prince of Ning. One of the officials of Prime Minister standing at the side watching the fight also looked a little familiar. Stopped in his tracks. It was Princess Royal. This censor, named Song Lang, although the face had been appreciated by His Majesty a few days ago, could not be seen clearly. His words would definitely carry seemed a little familiar. A princess, Your Majesty, a crown prince, I impeached the supervisor of Jiangyi putting on such a big show in the palace. As a censor, the court officials suddenly felt as if there were 10,000 horses galloping in their hearts. He knowingly broke the law and beat up a prince together with the county magistrate of the palace guards. He should be punished with the same punishment. Before the court officials could approach, Your Majesty, a group of guards rushed over. Please make a decision. They were about to draw their weapons, but after Eming gave them a cold stare. they just surrounded the place.
The voices in the court suddenly became much quieter.
Several people immediately went up to pull officials of the censor felt their hearts skip a beat at the same time.
Although fighting in the palace was a serious
secretly
crime,
cursed
one was the
Song
crown
Lang in their
prince,
hearts,
and the other had a special
status.
How could this matter be mentioned in the court?
No matter how bold the
Prince
guard
Ning
captain
only
was,
had one son.
he did not dare to use violence against a superior of the secret
if he was
intelligence
really
office.
Punished with the same punishment,
He did not
it
know
would not
which
take
unlucky
long
guy
for the
had offended
censor's
both
office
of them
to be
at the same
demolished.
time.
Wasn't
He was
Prime
afraid
Minister
that this
Qin's
beating
beating
would
would
be
be
high
high
enough.
enough?
The officials of
this
Prime
unlucky
Minister
guy
Qin's faction were usually arrogant enough
this
in the
was
court,
His Highness,
right?
the King of Shu.
But none of them mentioned the matter
Looking
of
at the
Crown
guy
Prince
lying
Li
on the
Xian
ground
just
who had
now.
fainted.
The guard captain
It was not
vaguely
because they had
recognized a
forgotten,
familiar face,
but because they did not dare to.
He immediately gasped.
Not only
and
were
his
the
heart
censors
was in
cursing
his throat.
Song Lang in their hearts,
Oh no!
but the official who wanted to severely
this matter
punish
has
Li
become
also
serious.
had a dark expression on his face.
Quick, summon the imperial
This rash
physician.
young man was really touching
the guard
pot
captain
that
said
shouldn't be
hurriedly,
boiled.
then turned around and
Originally
calmly
ordered,
everyone was
arrest Li
well aware
Xianzi
of
and
this
Crown
matter.
Prince Li Xian.
But after he made such
Looking
a
at His
fuss,
Highness,
it had
who
to
was
be
in a
put on the
terrible
table.
state,
The guard captain
the
knew that
assistant minister
today's
of the
matter was
Ministry
no
of
longer
Right,
something
who
that
was
he
the
could
first
handle.
to speak,
Braced
go
himself
and
again
report
and
to His
said,
Majesty.
"It is obvious to all
The
that
palace
Li,
guards were
the county
perceptive.
magistrate of Chang'an,
Although their
is the
leader's
culprit
order
of
was
this
to
matter.
capture them,
They only
Crown
surrounded
Prince
the
Li
two of
Xian
them and
may
did
have
not
been
make any
bewitched by
rude
him.
movements.
Moreover,
Why are you so
he did not
nervous?
cause much harm to His Highness,
We won't run away.
the King of Shu." Li Xian
The young
clapped his
censor
hands
Song
and
Lang's
said,
words
curling
caused
his
a
lips.
sudden change in the court.
When the unknown object
From
was
wanting to
carried by
convict
two
Li,
guards and
the
rushed
county
to the
magistrate
imperial
of
physician,
Chang'an,
the
to
officials
wanting
who had
to
left the
exonerate
court
Li
finally
Xian,
saw his
the
full
crown
appearance.
prince of Prince Ning.
This made all the
His
officials
Highness,
secretly
the King of
despise
Shu.
him. A young
After
official
seeing the
looked at the
object
officials in the
clearly,
court
several
who were
officials
intimidated by
immediately
Ning
lost their
power
balance
and were able to
fell to
say
the
such
ground.
words that went against their will
The
without
person that Li
blushing or
Xianzi
panting.
and Crown Prince Li Xian
He
just
sighed
beat up
and
was
was actually His
disappointed.
Highness, the King of
So
Shu.
what if he was Ning Wang?
Thinking of the scene
Could he
just
be more
now,
powerful
the
than the
people
emperor,
thought to themselves,
more powerful
if
than
it were
the
not
laws
for
of
his
the country?
clothes and figure, even
Thinking
the
of his
imperial
10 years of
concubine
hard
would
work
not
and
have
his
recognized
recognized
him
him
just
just
by
by
looking
looking
at
at
his
his
face.
face.
Serve the country. A trace of
followed was a
determination
monstrous
appeared on the young
uproar.
official's face. He strode forward and spoke his own
Chapter
voice.
447.
I second the
Just
motion.
now,
Looking
that
at
was
the
really the
performance
King
of
of
countless
Shu.
officials
What
in
a
the court,
scandal.
Emperor Jing
What a
finally waved
scandal.
his hand. Assaulting
A
a
eunuch
prince
took
is
out a
outrageous.
booklet
from his sleeve and walked down.
He's simply out of control.
He handed it to Prime Minister
A fight
Shen
in the
and
palace,
Prime Minister
and the
Qin,
target was a
who were
prince,
standing in
a
front of the
prince with a
officials
very
and had not
sensitive
spoken a
status
word.
and identity.
Since
This
ancient
was the
times,
first time
the left
since the
was the
founding
most
of the Jing
respected.
kingdom.
Therefore,
Even during the
between
reign
the
of
left
Emperor
and right
Taizu,
prime ministers,
such an atrocious
although
incident
Prime
had
Minister
never
Qin
happened
was
in
the
the
most
palace.
powerful in the court,
The
Prime
officials
Minister
who were
Shen's
close to the
status
King
was
of
higher.
Shu were shocked and angry.
Prime Minister Shen took the booklet
All
and
of them
opened
were
it with a
filled with
puzzled
righteous
look.
indignation and wished
After
they
a
could
while,
happily eat
his
into
expression
pieces.
became a little strange, and
In
he
recent
handed the
days,
booklet to Prime
the King
Minister
of Shu's
Qin.
reputation in the
Seeing
imperial
the
court had
expression on
declined.
Prime Minister Shen's face,
He had lost
Prime
faith
Minister
in front of
Qin
his
could not
majesty
help but
and
have a
even the
bad
officials.
premonition.
Now,
he took the
he didn't
booklet
care
and
about
looked
the
at
little
it.
face he had lost.
After a while, when the
He
booklet
was
was
beaten
handed out from
unconscious
Prime
and
Minister
carried
Qin's
away by
hand,
the guards
his
with his face
expression
covered
also
with
began
blood.
to become a little ugly.
How could he have any face
As
left?
this booklet was circulated
Even
among
if
the
His Highness
officials,
ascended
the
the
sound
throne
of
in the future,
exclamations and
this
gasps
incident
could
would
never
never
be
be
erased
erased
from the history books. Although the other officials
were
all
not
had
so
different
angry,
expressions,
they couldn't help thinking of the
Gradually,
rumors about Li
the court
Xianzi
became
and the King of
strangely
Shu in
quiet.
recent days.
Many officials
Li
looked at
Xianzi
Prime
was so
Minister
frightened
Qin
by a
and
few
the
words
officials
from
who
the King
were
of
close
Shu.
to the King of Shu. Was he worried that
Although
the King
they
of
did
Shu
not
would
say it
settle accounts
explicitly,
with him
the
after he
meaning was
ascended the throne?
self-evident.
As an adult
Nonsense.
prince, he actually
This
took
was
the
a bunch of
initiative to bully a
nonsense.
young and stupid princess.
Was he as cowardly as the rumors
when His
said
Majesty
when he
was
beat the King of
seriously
Shu
ill?
just now?
Not only did he not stay
Thinking
in the
of that
palace
madness
to fulfill
and
his filial
ruthlessness,
duties,
they still
but he
felt
also
a chill
held a
in their
banquet in
hearts.
his mansion. The King of
Thinking
Shu
of the
would
King of
probably
Shu's
never forget
previous
today's
actions.
shadow for the
Prime
rest
Minister
of his life.
Qin,
Tell me,
Li
what
Yi
kind of
couldn't
person
hear
do you
or
want
see
to help
the
ascend
uproar
the
of the
throne?
officials and the frightened
If someone
eyes
with
of the
such a
surrounding
temperament
guards.
became the emperor, many
the sound
officials
around him
felt that their
seemed to be
lives would be
isolated
greatly
by an
threatened.
invisible barrier. This was only one
Because
point
of the
in
large
booklet.
amount of exercise just
In
now.
addition,
His
what about
chest
the
was
intermittent
slightly heaving up
hysteria
and
of
down.
the Prince of Chang and County?
However,
he didn't have
this
time to
booklet
wipe
was
the
sent from
sweat
His
on his
Majesty's,
forehead, so there was no doubt
his
about
eyes
its authenticity.
passed over the palace guard surrounding
With the
him and
testimony
fell on
of
a
the
small
Imperial
figure.
Physician Bureau,
When he
the
saw
illness
that
of the
silly
Prince
but
of
extremely
Chang
friendly
and
little
County should not be
face,
fake,
Li Yi felt
the
joy
Prince of
and
Chang
relief that he had
and
never
County
felt
was actually
before.
suffering from hysteria.
He smiled again.
No one had ever known
But it was
about
this kind
before.
and warm smile that
But
caused
in
the
this
surrounding
way,
guards
the
to
mystery
feel a
in
chill
everyone's
their
hearts
hearts.
was finally explained.
Did he know what was waiting for
No
him
wonder
after
he
beating
would do
the king
such a
of Shu
thing.
to such a state?
Except for a lunatic,
How could he still
how could
smile
a normal
in this
person
situation?
beat a prince in the palace in
This
front
Li
of the civil
Xianzi
and military
must be
officials?
crazy.
In the hall of longevity, had always been close
Emperor
to him.
Jing had just taken his medicine
Could it be that
and
he was
lying on the
infected by
soft
Li
mattress,
Xian,
preparing to rest for an hour before getting up to read the important memorials. Hysteria was not a reason to beat a prince. The Imperial Physician Bureau
Although
had
the
advised him
punishment
many
could be
times
reduced
not
according
to
to the
overwork
circumstances,
himself, the King of Shu had been injured to
his
such a
condition
degree
would worsen.
If it was lightly
Emperor
mentioned,
Jing,
how
who
could
had
the
never
royal
cared
family
about this
save
advice,
face, finally realized that his body was not as good as it used to be after the previous incident. Everyone in the court knew about Princess Yongning's illness. He felt a little tired. A year ago, in order to cure Princess Yongning's soullessness, temporarily His Majesty ordered to the back of famous doctors all over the world. His Majesty has just promised a generous reward. If there's anything, the reward was so generous that anyone would be tempted. We really have an urgent matter. Even the Imperial Physician Bureau thought that the princess's illness was incurable. The eunuch guarding the door and the countless famous doctors could not do anything about it. Shut up. After a long time, Changda's figure had unknowingly floated to their side as he spoke coldly. But things in the world were so unexpected. Chief Steward Chang, the King of Shu, was beaten, the two guards and Princess Yongning's terminal illness was cured. Changda looked at the two of them and said indifferently, this was done by one person. Speak. Was it a reward or a punishment? There were imperial guards in the palace. Was it praise or what could happen? The water had been muddled by the air of the imperial city. Nothing was more undoubtedly became complicated. In the court, no one dared to interrupt. A guard immediately said, the strange silence lasted for a long time. County Magistrate Li Yi and Emperor Jing waved his hand. Just beat up the King of Shu in the palace. An official took out the prepared imperial edict and began to read it. The King of Shu was seriously injured and has been sent to the Imperial Physician Bureau. When he opened his eyes, we have arrested County Magistrate Li and Crown Prince Li and are waiting for His Majesty's punishment. The indifference on Changda's face disappeared. Li Yi sat up and tried to distance himself from Changda's old face. He suddenly looked at the guard and said, "What did you say?" He said, "Say it again." Early in the morning. After His Majesty said, "Is there anything I can help you with? If there's something, Chief Steward, report to me." County Magistrate Li, it's time for you to leave the palace. It did not mean that the officials was expressionless and said their children. A palace maid had already brought the toiletries. Most of the officials had to return to their posts and continue their work. There was a warm breeze outside, they would hold a small meeting to convey the spirit of the morning court session to their subordinates and implement His Majesty's instructions. Li Yi turned around and saw Changda standing in the hall looking at him. Many officials in the 3 provinces, before I answer this question, and 24 departments were not busy with their work. Li Yi gathered his arms and looked at him and whispered something. Speak, Changda said lightly. Have you heard that the King of Shu was beaten up in the palace today? Do you know the Sunflower Manual? A gossipy assistant minister from the Ministry of Work said mysteriously while pouring water. When Li Yi walked briskly out of the palace, Changda, who was standing at the entrance of a palace and muttering the words, Sunflower Manual. How could the King of Shu feel something? Hearing this, he suddenly turned his head and looked in a certain direction. Came over. He looked at the assistant minister, looked around and did not see the confusion on his face lasted for a moment. He immediately slowly withdrew his described what he had seen on the way down to the imperial court. The manager of the catering department looked at the rows of servants with a gloomy expression. There were endless exclamations. He said angrily, "Speak." The officials who were further away also stopped what they were doing and looked at the assistant minister with puzzled and curious eyes. The people of a certain street in the capital were surprised to find that a smoothie shop that had been very popular recently was not open. It had been peaceful for decades, paced around the entrance just like for a moment before leaving with some regret. There was rarely any backyard of the shop. The woman in white had a calm expression. The bigger the ripples would be when a figures sat there and looked in the direction of the palace. That was because the incident happened when hundreds of officials went down to the imperial court session. The miserable condition of the King of Shu was witnessed by countless people. The stone steps leading to the outside of the palace were very long. The guards at the palace gate were still beaten up in the imperial palace. Their sharp eyes scanned the surroundings to prevent unrelated people from approaching. They even dared to beat the King of the palace gate and looked back. They are really audacious. At this moment, everything seemed to be normal, about the matter between the King of Shu and Li Xianzi. It was not noon yet, seems that the King of Shu was shining brightly and the temperature was drove him crazy. The woman standing under the willow tree with a sword in her arms said that the King of Shu would have been beaten to death today if the imperial guards hadn't discovered it in time. Li Yi was in an extremely good mood. No. He strode over, opened his arms, I heard that the King of Shu and Crown Prince Li Xian had a quarrel and were beaten up by them. Because he was too happy. He picked her up and spun her around. Everyone knows that the King of Shu has been plotting against the Wang family for a long time. He remembered that this was Mississippi Lu, not
Unexpectedly,
Xiao or Yongning,
Crown Prince Li
so he
Xian
did not
intervened
dare
at
to
the
kiss her
critical
pretty
moment.
face or forehead.
Today,
They met
before
in
she
the
could
imperial
react,
palace
Li
and started
quickly
to
put her
fight.
down and then waved his
However,
hand.
the king of Shu
Go
was not as
home.
skilled as them.
Looking at his back,
I heard that he is
Mississippi
still in the
gradually
imperial
put down her
physician's
arms
office
that were
and his
holding
life
the
and
sword,
death are
as
unknown.
if she had put down something
Li
extremely
Mingze,
heavy at
the
the same
assistant
time.
minister of the Ministry of Personnel,
A few hundred meters
stood
away
at
from
the
the
door
palace
and coughed.
gate. A man who was sitting
Several
under a big
officials
tree
who were
and
whispering
chatting with
to
a
each
tea
other
vendor
turned
turned
around
his head
and their
looked,
expressions
and a trace of
changed.
joy appeared on his face.
They immediately returned to their
He stood
original
up and
positions
quickly
and
disappeared
pretended to
into the
handle
alley.
official business.
Not long after,
Li Xianzi
the
was the
people on a
nephew of
certain
the
street were
assistant
surprised
minister.
to find that the smoothie
This
shop
matter
that was
should
tightly
not be
closed
mentioned
in the
here.
morning had actually opened
A
for
trace
business.
of deep worry flashed in
They
Li Mingze's
hurriedly
eyes.
rushed to the door of the shop.
This time, Li Yi
A few
really
days
made
ago,
a big trouble.
the shop had released a few
Not
new
to mention
products.
him, except for the emperor,
Because there were
no one
too
could
many
intervene
people
in this
queuing
matter.
every day. They had
This
not
little
tried
guy
it for
has
several
always
days.
been calm.
They could
Why
not
is
miss
he
it
so
today.
reckless this
Today's
time?
morning court session did not
Outside the
last
hall
long.
of diligent government,
The
several
officials
old
walked
generals
out of the
gathered
palace
together.
gate in twos and threes.
Seeing that
with
Li Yi
complicated
and Li Xian
expressions
were
and
taken
different
in by
thoughts.
the imperial guards,
Everyone
they
was
frowned
thinking about the
deeply.
content of the imperial
Fighting in the
edict from
palace
His Majesty
was a serious
just now,
crime, let alone
the
beating up
Crown
a
Prince of
prince.
Chang and County
However,
Li Yi,
this was
and the
different
Crown
from the
Prince
written
of
law.
Prince Ning, Li Xian,
It was up to the emperor
had beaten
to
the
decide
prince
whether
in the
to be
imperial
beheaded by
palace in front of all the
cuts or
civil
lightly
and
beaten
military
with a few
officials
planks
of the imperial
board.
court.
Fortunately,
Their behavior
according
was
to their
extremely
understanding of the
abominable.
emperor, it was
Of
impossible
course,
to
they
behead
couldn't
him.
let it go lightly.
Since the emperor
As a
valued him
result,
so much,
Crown Prince
he
Li
would
Xian
definitely
was
not
stripped of his
punish him
position as
severely.
the supervising commissioner
Moreover,
of Jiangxi
this
province.
matter also involved Crown
He
Prince
had to
Li
spend
Xian,
half a month in
so
the
it was
Crown
even more
Prince's
difficult
mansion
to
to
punish
reflect
him.
on his mistakes and was
However,
not allowed to step
hundreds
out
of
the
officials
mansion.
in the imperial court
Although
were
Li
present.
Yi, the county
Under
magistrate
the
of
watchful
Chang
eyes of so many
had a
people,
sudden attack
the
of
two of them
hysteria.
had beaten the king
It was
of
not the
Shu
reason
so
for him to
miserably.
seriously injure the king of
It was
Shu.
not easy to overlook this
However,
matter,
since he miraculously
the officials
cured
of the king of
Princess
Shu
Yongning's
and
terminal
the
illness,
imperial
His
censor would
Majesty
not let
was
go
very
of this
pleased.
opportunity.
In the spirit of
imperial
humanitarianism,
censor and the
His
imperial
Majesty
censor
did
would
not
not
punish
let
him
go of this
severely.
opportunity. The imperial consort was
He was
even
only
more
stripped of
difficult
his
to deal
position
with.
as the
In
assistant
short,
minister of the
this
Ministry
time,
of War
he was
and
going
fined
to
his
suffer
salary
some
for a
hardships.
year.
It was not until the officials
day
walked
was a
out
very
of the hall
ordinary
that they
day for the
realized when
commoners
Li
in the
Yi,
capital,
the county magistrate
The
of
only
Chang'an,
regret was that it was
became
cloudy
the
in the
assistant
morning.
minister of the Ministry of
They
War.
thought that there would be a heavy
Although
rain
His
to
Majesty
dispel the
had
summer
mentioned this
heat.
matter in the court,
Unexpectedly,
it was immediately opposed
cleared
by
up
many
before
officials.
noon.
It
the
seemed
end,
that they would
it
not
was
be
left
able to cool
unsettled.
down for the next few days.
How could such a thing happen
However,
when there was no
the
sign of
families
anything
the
happening?
officials and lords with a little bit of status
although
were
this
shaken
move
by
seemed
certain news
unreasonable,
from the palace.
no one,
including Prime Minister Qin, objected to it. Chapter
Since
448.
they knew the whole story of yesterday's incident,
I would like to
they
see how that
immediately
Li Yi
understood
will
that the
escape
king
this
of Shu's
calamity.
beating was probably in
In
vain.
the Duke of Qin residence,
Now
Qin
that
Chong
things had
stepped
developed
into the
to this
residence
point,
with a smile
it was no
on his
longer
face.
as simple as it was in the beginning.
This caused the servants
On
in
the
the residence
contrary,
to feel
it
puzzled.
had little to do with Crown
Did the
Prince
sun
Li
rise
Xian
from
and
the
Crown
west
Prince
today?
Li.
The second
His Majesty
master,
had
who
always
usually
been
treated others with disdain,
especially
was
in
actually
terms of
smiling
morality.
so happily.
As an adult
A
prince,
few coughs
the
came
king
from
of
a
Shu
hall in front
actually
of them.
bullied a 6-year-old little
Qin
princess,
who had taken a leave
Although
of absence
Princess
due to
Yongning was
illness,
not the biological
walked out.
daughter of concubine Chui.
Seeing the laughing
She was
Qin
his younger
Chong,
sister
he
anyway.
asked in confusion,
After knowing
what
this
happened
matter,
in court
even
today
they were
for you to be
extremely
so
disappointed
happy?
in the king of Shu,
A
let
moment
alone
later,
his Majesty.
after hearing Qin Chong describe
If the
what
king
he
of
had
Shu
seen
did
in the
not have
palace
the
today,
support of
a
several
hint of
rich and
shock
powerful
involuntarily
families and the
appeared on
support of
Qin
Prime
Ching's
Minister
pale
Qin in
face.
the court, he would
Is
not
this
have had a
true?
chance to be the crown prince.
It's true. It can't
As
be
for
any
the
more
inheritance
true.
of the heir over the
At
concubines,
that time,
I
what
was
was the
watching from
ancestral
afar.
system compared to the rise
This
and
is him
fall of the
seeking
country.
his own death. He
This
can't
time,
blame us.
His Majesty had undoubtedly
Qin Chong
conveyed
laughed
his
loudly
attitude
and
to the
said,
officials.
I will immediately write a memorial
After today,
of impeachment.
the officials who were firmly
Under
on the
the
king
eyes
of
of the
Shu's
public,
side would
all
try
the
their
officials
best to
saw
change
it.
the situation.
This
while
time,
those who were
even
still
His
wavering
Majesty
on the
will not be
sidelines
able
would
to
probably
protect him.
feel even more uneasy.
At the corner of the corridor
But
on
in
the
any
right,
case,
the prayer
no one
beads
would
in the
mention
white making the king of Shu the crown prince in a short period of time. In a secluded hall in the palace, the king of Shu was lying on his back on the bed. In an instant, innumerable
his head was covered with white gauze and his eyes were fixed on the ceilings, and innumerable people's jaws dropped in shock.
To the
concubine
family,
Chui stood in front of the bed,
in the crown
her
prince's
face full of
residence,
anger.
The crown prince's consort,
She looked at the king of
who had
Shu
just
and
received
said,
the news.
"Why did you provoke
paled.
Yongning?"
She
Do you
hurriedly
know how
boarded a
difficult it
carriage
was
and
for us
left
to
the
get to where we
residence.
are today in order for
In
you
the
to
Li
become the
residence,
crown prince
the old
and his
madam
son
had an
throne in the
anxious
future?
expression. The king of
She
Shu's
immediately
face
had
was
the
covered
servants
with white
prepare the
gauze,
visiting
so his
cards and send
expression
them to
could
the
not be
various
seen at
noble
all.
families in the capital.
Only from his clenched
In the
fists
Viscount's
and the deep
residence,
hatred in
the
his
bruised
eyes could
Fong
one
sat
tell
on
his
the
mood
stone
at the
steps
moment.
in front of the door.
He had just
staring at
learned
the
of what had
sky in a
happened in the
daze.
court today. With such
He
an
wanted
evil
to cut
woman in
Li
the
Yi
house,
into pieces
these
and
days
eat his blood and
were
flesh,
truly unbearable.
but he was only fined a year's salary.
Suddenly, the sound of hooves
To him,
came from the
what
end
could
of
be
the
more
road.
ironic than this?
Fong turned his head and saw a fast horse galloping in his direction.
He was beaten and seriously
Son-in-law
injured in
has
front
been a
of
little
everyone,
unhappy these
and now
past
he could
few
only
days.
lie on the bed,
Shawan murmured,
unable to move.
her hand supporting her chin
But the
as she
person
looked
who
at the
beat
young
him up
mistress
was not
and
punished
second
at
young
all.
mistress. How could
There
he
was
still
a
have
hint
the
of worry
face to
on
stand in
Li's
front of
face.
others in the future?
As the closest person to Li Yi, she could naturally notice the changes in Li Yi
also hated the
these
person
days,
he should not
but
hate.
she didn't know what she could do.
If he had given him the title
Mississippi
of Crown
Lu
Prince
leaned
earlier,
against the
you
table
should
with her sword
recuperate
in
here
her
these
arms.
days.
There was
I
no
have already
expression
written
on
to
her
your
face.
uncle.
They will
She
help you
frowned
think
as she
of a
thought
way.
of the words and emotions
After
that Li
you
Yi
recover,
said that
you
she
can
couldn't
go to Prime
understand.
Minister Qin's residence.
Young mistress,
lying on the bed.
something bad
the king
has
of Shu
happened.
listened to concubine
Fong's
Chui's words.
panicked voice sounded outside
He
the door.
loosened his clenched
and the
fists
three women
and took
turned
a deep
their heads
breath.
at the same time.
I know,
Your Majesty,
he gritted
you
his
must
teeth
seek
and
justice for
squeezed these
these
words
words
out
out of his mouth. For many people, the king of Shu's loss of power was not something to be happy about. According to the officials in the Shangshu province, Prime Minister Qin had been sullen today. It was rare for him to reprimand an official for a small matter. All the officials in the Shangshu province felt insecure. In Duke Chen's residence, a servant girl lowered her head to clean up the broken teacup. She did not even dare to breathe loudly, let alone look up. Recalling the conversation between the two masters just now, the servant girl outside the door quietly left and trotted towards a small courtyard. The officials and nobles who were close to the king of Shu were naturally not in a good mood. However, there were also people who praised Li Xianzi in their hearts. After the few princes who were still in the capital who were about to come of age heard about what happened today, their minds finally became active. They originally thought that with their strength, it was impossible for them to compete with the king of Shu. However, what happened today had ignited a glimmer of hope in their hearts. Even if it was only a glimmer, no one was willing to give up. At the same time, there were also countless letters flying out of the capital. Their destination was the fiefdom of those princes who had come of age. In the crown prince's residence, Li Xian was having a headache dealing with the Wang family. In the viscount's residence, Li Yi was also humbly receiving lessons from the old mistress. The servant girls all felt that it was unfair for Lord Ju. Although they did not know what Lord Ju had done to make the old mistress so angry, their monthly allowance had been doubled by Lord Ju. Naturally, they would side with Lord Ju. The servant girls in the residence counted with her fingers how much double the monthly allowance was. They could get a lot more every month. If this continued, they would be able to renovate their house in no time. She did not dare to think about it anymore. The chicken that the old mistress wanted had not been cooked yet. She did not understand why the old mistress specifically told the chicken not to be chopped in vain. Obviously, chopping in vain was her best method. Chapter 452. Child, why did you provoke the king of Shu? The king of Shu belongs to the Li family. Do you think a mere viscount like you can provoke him? Madame Dowager sat on the chair and reprimanded him with a sullen face. You are now a dignitary in the capital city. You can't be impulsive. The lives of dozens of people in the viscount's mansion are in your hands. Do you know how dangerous it is in the court today? If it weren't for His Majesty's wise judgment, who didn't favor the king of Shu and only removed you from your official position and grounded you at home for half a month, how could you be standing here now? Madame Dowager had always been kind, especially in front of Li Yi. She didn't even bear to say a harsh word to him. But today, she seemed to be really angry. After hearing that Li Yi had returned to the mansion, she rushed over from the Li family as soon as possible. She had been reprimanding him for almost an hour. At first, Li Yi could admit his mistake humbly and promised that he would never do it again. But later, he really didn't know what to say and could only listen with his head lowered. Of course, Madame Dowager was also very protective of him. After all, the king of Shu was a prince of a country. He represented the face of the royal family and had a very strong influence in the court. Normal people wouldn't provoke him. Moreover, what he had done could no longer be described as provoking. To be honest, it wasn't that he had nothing better to do. He just wanted to play with the king of Shu after eating and drinking. In the situation at that time, when he heard Princess Yongning's words, he felt as if his brain was about to explode. Blood rushed to his head. Not to mention the king of Shu, even if he was the crown prince, the emperor, or the heavenly king, he would probably dare to go up and beat him first. As for the result, at that time, how could he have the time to think about it? Madam Dowager, have a cup of tea. As old Furen reprimanded Lord Ju, the maids and the residents retreated. Rui walked in with a cup of tea and handed it to old Furen personally. The status of the king of Shu is so. Seeing Rui, Madam Dowager immediately smiled and changed the topic. Let's not talk about the king of Shu for the time being. Let's talk about you too. You've been married for so long, but Rui's belly hasn't moved at all. Your second uncle's child got married later than you did. Now Miss Shou's belly is bulging. Do you want to find some imperial physicians to take a good look at you? Just a moment ago, he was being reprimanded, and the next second, he was talking about children. The old man's change of topic was too sudden, and Li Yi couldn't keep up. Rui was taken aback for a moment and blushed. She handed the tea to old madam and hurriedly left. Old Furen put down the teacup and looked at Li Yi. This concerns the continuation of the family line. You must pay more attention to this matter. I will go talk to Rui again. Seeing old Furen leave the room, Li Yi sat on the chair. His legs were numb from standing for so long. He picked up the teacup and took a sip. His right index finger tapped unconsciously on the table. The king of Shu, the maids who were about to come in to clean the room saw Lord Ju's expression and thought that he was upset because old Furen had just reprimanded him, so she carefully left. Not long after, Rui walked in from outside. Seeing Li Yi's thoughtful expression, she didn't say anything. She just walked behind him, reached out her hand, and gently massaged his shoulder. Li Yi returned to his senses and stood up. Seeing the worry on her brows, he held her hand and said, "The matter of children cannot be rushed. Wife, you don't have to care about old Furen's words." Rui shook her head and said, "It's not because of this matter." Li Yi sighed and said, "This time, I was indeed a little impulsive." Rui raised her head to look at him. Hubby is not an impulsive person. This concubine believes that hubby must have his reasons for doing so. This concubine only hopes that I can share some of the burden with hubby. Hubby knows that this concubine is also very powerful. Li Yi fell silent. To him, in this world, there was nothing more important than the people in that small courtyard in the willow leaf stockade. He didn't want to bring in those irrelevant things from the outside world. They shouldn't have come into contact with these things. However, he seemed to have neglected the feelings of Rui and the others. Rui was obviously unhappy. Thinking of Mississippi Lu's hidden worry and Xiao Huan's red and swollen eyes, he patted Rui's hand and said, "I'm sorry, it's my fault. I made you worry. Wife, don't you want to know what I'm going to do? I'll tell you now." Li Yi looked at her and asked, "About the king of Shu?" "Wife, how much do you know?" Rui nodded and said, "I heard everything old Furen said just now. The king of Shu is the eldest son of His Majesty and the prince most likely to inherit the throne. His mother is concubine Cui, and he has the support of several rich families led by the Cui family. He also has the support of Prime Minister Qin and countless officials in the court." Li Yi nodded and said seriously, "Yes, the king of Shu is the most likely to sit on the throne among all the princes. What we need to do is to guard the Viscount mansion and live a good life. By the way, we can pull him down from that position." Rui raised her head abruptly and looked at Li Yi. Even she was shocked by what he said just now. Looking at her surprised expression, Li Yi couldn't help but laugh. He stretched out his index finger and tapped on her forehead, saying, "I'm just joking, wife, don't take it seriously. Even His Majesty didn't punish me much, wife, so you don't have to worry." Li Yi comforted her as he moved the rocking chair out to bask in the sun. After a while, looking at the figure leisurely lying in the courtyard and teasing the little maid, Rui's eyes flashed with a trace of determination. She lowered her voice and said something. "I know, Li Han, Monarch Jin, did not have a good time these days. Even though his teacher was grounded by his imperial father and could not come to the palace, and he had not seen him for a few days, every time he thought of how crazy he looked that day, even if it was in his dreams, Monarch Jin would be startled. Especially after he went to visit the King of Shu and thought that the reason why his teacher went crazy was because the King of Shu bullied Yongning, he had more nightmares at night. He saw it very clearly that day. The King of Shu didn't even touch Yongning, but she ended up in such a miserable state. Thinking about how he pulled Yongning's face, snatched her bestowment of ice, and said that she was a motherless child, the King of Shu's miserable state appeared in front of his eyes again. Monarch Jin shivered and quickened his steps to the Hall of Diligent Government. He heard that Yongning was no longer stupid. She must still remember that he bullied her. He wanted to see his imperial father. He could not go to mathematics class anymore. He could not see his teacher anymore. Otherwise, when his teacher found out about those things, he would definitely be beaten to death. Chapter 453. In the Hall of Diligent Government, in addition to Emperor Jing who was sitting in the seat of honor, there were many people in the hall. A man who looked to be in his 40s, dressed in a scarlet official uniform, frowned and asked, "Sir Yan, why is the military expenditure this year so much higher than in previous years? Did the Ministry of War really calculate it correctly? What does Lord Qin mean by this?" On the other side, a man with a square face and a dignified expression said faintly, "Every time the military expenditure is calculated, I will specially invite a few mathematicians from the Imperial College to help me calculate it." "Why, Lord Qin, are you suspecting that the Imperial College has calculated wrongly, or are you suspecting that the Ministry of War has reported the military expenditure falsely?" Although the person in front of him was the current Minister of Revenue, Qin Shao, the two of them had similar official positions, so the middle-aged man didn't have to give him any face. Qin Huan had just asked a question when he was interrupted by the Minister of War, Yan Bing. Naturally, he felt depressed. The Imperial College had the most talented mathematicians of the Jing Kingdom. The military expenditure was huge, and it was no small matter. It was impossible for them to make a mistake in their calculations. Qin Huan himself would not doubt it, and even if he did doubt it, he would not say it here. The Chancellor of the Directorate, the Minister of Education, and several scholars from the Hongwen School were all standing at the side. There were even a few Confucian scholars among them. These Confucian scholars didn't care if he was the Minister of Revenue or not. If he dared to doubt their professionalism here, they would definitely fight him to the death. As for suspecting the Ministry of War of falsely reporting military expenditures, there was no evidence. Even His Majesty couldn't say such a thing. Qin Huan wasn't that stupid. He explained, "You've misunderstood, Sir Yan. It's just that I'm sure Sir Yan is aware of the current state of the National Treasury. As the Minister of Revenue, it's my duty to investigate every sum of money. I hope Sir Yan won't take it to heart." Yan Bing glanced at him and said, "In the past few years, the dynasty was stable and there were no wars, so the military expenditure was naturally low. Although the results of this campaign are impressive, the expenditure is not small. Whether it is rations, military equipment, or the soldiers' salaries, they all require money. Lord Qin, don't think too simply." Qin Huan pondered for a moment before he nodded and finally stopped talking. Although the national treasury was tight, the money had to be squeezed out no matter what. It was just that the days ahead would be even more difficult. The matter of military expenditure is of great importance. We will discuss it later. My two beloved ministers, please wait for a moment. Emperor Jing walked down from above and spoke to the two of them. Then, he looked at the people waiting at the side and asked, "May I know why the great scholars entered the palace?" Among the people from the Directorate of Directorates and Hongwen-Guan, 3 of them were old men with white hair and beards. Although their positions were not high, they had spent their entire lives teaching and had many achievements. Even Emperor Jing had to give them enough respect. An old man stepped forward and bowed to Emperor Jing, saying, "Your Majesty, I heard that the county magistrate of Chang'an, Li Yi, taught the princes and princesses arithmetic at the age of 20. Is this true?" "It's true." Emperor Jing's eyes flashed with a strange light and he nodded. "Please forgive me for speaking bluntly." The old man stroked his beard and said, "This is too ridiculous. That Li Yi is only indebted to His Majesty and was bestowed the title of County Magistrate of Chang'an. He is only 20 years old and yet he only has the title of elementary scholar. This shows how shallow his knowledge is. How can such a person become the teacher of the prince and princess? What virtue or ability did that Li Yi have? What does His Majesty think of the Directorate of Directorates and Hongwen-Guan?" The old man's words were so direct that Emperor Jing could not answer for a while. Qin Huan, the Minister of Revenue, looked at the people from the Directorate of Directorates and Hongwen-Guan with a strange look on his face. Those people had finally taken action against the county magistrate of Chang'an, Li Yi. The incident of the county magistrate of Chang'an beating the king of Shu had passed. Because this matter involved many people, once it became a big deal, the reputation of the king of Shu would be ruined. Therefore, the officials of the king of Shu, including Prime Minister Qin, all chose to remain silent and did not make things difficult for the county magistrate of Chang'an, Li Yi. However, it was also impossible for this matter to be brushed aside so easily. If they were only slightly interested in the county magistrate of Chang'an a few days ago, after that day, Li Yi had officially become a thorn in their side. He had only done one thing and made countless people's long-term hard work go down the drain. If the county magistrate of Chang'an was not eliminated, it would be difficult to vent their anger. The words of the great scholar from the Directorate of Directorates were the first step of their revolt. After all, these two places were the sphere of influence of the officials of Prime Minister Qin. Qin Huan glanced at Yan Bing, the Minister of War opposite him. Seeing his expressionless face, Qin Huan wondered why Yan Bing did not say a word at this moment, given his relationship with the Li family. Your Highness, His Majesty is discussing important matters with several officials. Your Highness can't go in. Suddenly, there was a noise at the door of the hall, temporarily breaking the atmosphere in the hall. Everyone looked in the direction of the door. Father. Li Han, the Prince of Jin, dodged 2 eunuchs and ran in, panting. When he just said this, he could not help but be stunned when he saw so many people in the hall. Except for his father, he did not know most of the people in the hall, but the 2 old men standing there were teachers who taught him Confucian classics and history. When Li Han saw them, he felt a headache and said in a low voice, "Father, please go ahead. Han will wait for you outside." Emperor Jing was usually busy with state affairs and had little time to teach his children. He remembered that the last time he saw Li Han, Prince of Jin, his face was rounder than it was now. He did not expect that he had lost so much weight in such a short time. He could not help but feel distressed and guilty. He touched his head and said, "It's okay. Han will go over there and play alone for a while. When father is done with his business, I will accompany you." Li Han nodded and walked to the upper table alone. Emperor Jing looked a little absent-minded. In his memory, Prince of Jin had always been naughty and mischievous. He did not have the heart to study and liked to play. When he saw him again today, he had grown so much and become so well-behaved and sensible. As a father, he did not even know when his child had grown up. As an emperor, he was undoubtedly qualified, but as a father. Emperor Jing sighed in his heart, and his expression could not help but become gloomy. The appearance of Prince of Jin was only a small interlude. Seeing him walk to the back, a secretary of the Imperial College stood up and said, "Your Majesty, that Li Yi abandoned the calculation method and introduced that bow number. This is an act of forgetting his roots. How can such a person who forgets his ancestors become the teacher of the princes? The education of the princes is the most important thing. Your Majesty must not be careless. Could it be that the Imperial College's doctor of mathematics is inferior to a mere scholar? The county magistrate of Chang'an City, Li Yi, is immoral and incompetent. How can he teach our princes? Your Majesty, please reconsider and do not let the princes down. If this matter is spread, I am afraid that the people will laugh at us and think that there is no one in the Imperial College." The people of the Imperial College and the Hongwen School did not feel the change in Emperor Jing's mood. They all stepped forward and spoke sharply. There was only one request. The county magistrate of Chang'an City, Li Yi, had no talent and was not qualified to be the teacher of the princes and princesses. In order to prevent the princes from being delayed, they should choose a doctor of mathematics from the Imperial College to teach them personally. As for the county magistrate of Chang'an City, Li Yi, he should go back to where he came from. The people of the Imperial College and the Hongwen School tried to persuade Emperor Jing. On the table, Prince Jin, Li Han, was not interested in the conversation. He sat on a chair that did not match his body and looked around for a while. He felt a little bored and glanced at an open memorial on the table. He casually glanced at it and saw something familiar. He moved closer with interest. Chapter 454. Qin Huan listened to the advice of the directorate and the Hongwen School. He waited quietly on the side without much change in his expression. Although his surname was Qin, he had nothing to do with Prime Minister Qin. Because of his sensitive identity, he had never agreed to be recruited by any prince. Moreover, deep down, he did not approve of the king of Shu becoming the next emperor. If he was merely of mediocre aptitude, it would have been fine. It would have been difficult for the kingdom of Jing, which had been stabilized by several generations of emperors, to be completely defeated in his hands. However, the things that the king of Shu had done in recent days had caused him to become somewhat vigilant. Not to mention that the king of Jing kingdom was incompetent. If he did not have the most basic moral integrity and was surrounded by foreign enemies, there was a possibility that the king of Jing kingdom would perish. As for Li Yi, the prince of Chang'an County that everyone was talking about, Qin Huan never doubted His Majesty's ability to judge people. Since His Majesty asked him to teach the princes and princesses arithmetic, it meant that Li Xianzi was indeed qualified to do so. Anyway, this matter had nothing to do with him, so he stopped paying attention to it. Qin Huan glanced around the hall casually. When he was about to withdraw his gaze, he was suddenly startled and looked in a certain direction. Monarch Jin's fat figure was lying on the table. He bit the tip of his pen and frowned, as if he was thinking about something. After a while, his eyebrows relaxed and he looked a little proud. He picked up the pen and wrote quickly on the paper. After a while, he frowned again. Seeing this, Qin Huan suddenly felt a little confused. Seeing that the directorate belittled Li Yi's new arithmetic, Emperor Jing frowned and asked, "Isn't it said that the new arithmetic created by Li Yi is convenient and easy to use? I asked the directorate to try it out for a year. If it works, it will be promoted to the whole country. With such merit, why can't Li Yi be the teacher of the princes?" An old man snorted and said, "I've seen Li Yi's new method of calculation. It's nothing but a crooked method. How can it compare to the method passed down by our ancestors? The method of calculation is so convenient, yet he actually wants to replace it. If I were to meet such a person who has forgotten his ancestors, I'll definitely smash his head open. Qin Huan withdrew his gaze from Prince Jin and looked at the old man. The corners of his mouth couldn't help but twitch. Li Xianzi even dared to beat the king of Shu, so why would he be afraid of an old scholar? He was afraid that his old bones would be torn apart before he could break Li Xianzi's head. As soon as the old scholar finished speaking, the Chancellor of the Directorate of Imperial Academy stepped forward and said, "Your Majesty, although some people in the Directorate of Imperial Academy think that Li Yi's new mathematics is remarkable, they can't replace our plan. If we carry it out rashly, I'm afraid that it will only lead the students astray. If the foundation of the scholars in the Jing Kingdom is damaged, even if I die 10,000 times, I won't be able to absolve myself of the blame." In front of Emperor Jing, the Chancellor of the Directorate had already spoken very tactfully. The general meaning was that Li Yi's new mathematics was nothing. The Directorate of Imperial Academy didn't care about it at all. "Your Majesty, you are a layman, so don't blindly compare. When it comes to this, the Directorate of Imperial Academy is the professional." After that, several people stepped forward to speak. The general meaning was similar to that of the Chancellor of the Directorate of Imperial Academy. They belittled Li Yi's new mathematics. If such a person was allowed to teach the princes and princesses, not only would the Directorate of Imperial Academy and Hongwen School lose face, but His Majesty would also lose face outside the palace. Emperor Jing frowned, and a trace of doubt finally appeared on his face. Although he had dabbled in mathematics, he was not arrogant enough to think that he was better than the Directorate of Imperial Academy. Everyone, including the two great scholars, belittled Li Yi's new mathematics. Was he really wrong? Thinking of the way Li Yi used to teach the princes and princesses, Emperor Jing became even more doubtful. Seeing the doubt on Emperor Jing's face, the officials of the Directorate of Imperial Academy and the scholars of Hongwen School finally breathed a sigh of relief. The teachers of the princes were respected and extraordinary. This was an invisible umbrella in itself. Without this identity, the Prince of Chang and County was just the Prince of Chang and County. It would be much more convenient for them to deal with it. Qin Huan looked at Yan Bing again and found that he still had a dead face. His Majesty was obviously about to be convinced by them. Was Yan Bing really not going to do anything? Forget it. Anyway, this matter has nothing to do with me. Qin Huan shook his head and inadvertently glanced at Prince Jin behind him. He found that Prince Jin had put down his brush and stretched himself. The expression on his face seemed to be a little satisfied. In that case. Thinking that Li Yi himself seemed not very satisfied with this task, Emperor Jing thought for a while and said, "Let's choose from the Directorate of Imperial Academy, Father." Suddenly, a child's voice came from behind. Emperor Jing turned his head and saw Prince Jin, Li Han, standing behind him with something in his hand. Taking a closer look, he found that it was a memorial that had just been submitted by the Ministry of War. It recorded the details of various military expenses. It was also the thing that the two ministers had just argued about. He took the memorial from Li Han's hand and said, "You can't touch this. Han, wait a little longer. Father will play with you when it's over." "Father, they made a mistake in one of the questions." Prince Jin raised his head and looked at Emperor Jing. The 9-year-old fat boy was actually quite handsome. When he raised his head and spoke, he had a kind of cute feeling. At this time, his face was a little proud, like a child who had done a good deed and was waiting for an adult to praise him. This was the truth. Emperor Jing was stunned for a moment. Then he smiled and shook his head, saying, "Han, don't make trouble. Go over there to play." Even though Li Yi had once told him that Prince Jin was very talented in mathematics, Emperor Jing did not think that he would be better than the mathematics masters of the Directorate of Imperial Academy. If there was a problem with this memorial, who knew how many heads the Ministry of War would lose? How could Yan Bing take this matter lightly? "Father, they really made a mistake." His father did not believe him. Li Han felt a little wronged and said anxiously. Emperor Jing frowned and was about to reprimand him. However, when he saw Prince Jin's aggrieved face and his tears were about to come out, he remembered that he did not know how long it had been since he had a good talk with him. His heart softened and he said, "Well, then Han, tell father, where did they make a mistake?" The fat boy smiled again and opened the memorial in Emperor Jing's hand. Seeing the dense and strange characters on the memorial, Minister of War Yan Bing's face changed greatly. He looked at Emperor Jing and said, "Your Majesty, this." Emperor Jing waved his hand and said, "Just draw up a new one after you leave." Yan Bing watched Prince Jin open the long memorial and spread it on the ground. The original blank space had long been filled with characters. He could only nod with a bitter smile. "Here, it's here." The fat boy pointed to a place and said confidently, "Father, look. The transportation of grain and fodder between Liangzhou and Yuzhou should not be distributed like this. In this way, there will be too much consumption on the road." Prince Jin half knelt on the ground and pointed to a formula next to him. He said, "If there is a little more here and a little less here, it will be the best distribution. At least, the consumption will be reduced by more than 10%. It will also be a lot of money." The people of the Imperial College did not take this matter to heart. Yan Bing and Emperor Jing did not think that a 9-year-old child could point out the mistakes in the Imperial Court's military expenditure, so they did not pay much attention. Although Prince Jin's words were vague, Qin Huan, who had always been sensitive to money, quickly understood. The Ministry of Revenue had always aimed to do the most things with the least amount of money. No matter where the application was, they wanted to reduce the amount by 20%. The amount of military expenditure was huge, and the Ministry of Revenue allocated the majority of it every year. He had always been very cautious. However, because the Ministry of War had its own calculation method and he had the help of the Imperial College's mathematical masters, Qin Huan almost never doubted their correctness. What was the result? The problem could be solved with 100,000 taels, but the Ministry of War asked for 120,000 taels from the Ministry of Revenue. Of course, this money was not embezzled by the Ministry of War. It was wasted on the road, and this was only the first time. 20,000 taels for one time. How much would it be for 10 times? If the mathematical masters of the Imperial College were at this level, how much money would the national treasury have wasted over the years? Qin Huan's heart was immediately filled with anger when he thought about the emperor's reduction of taxes, the emptiness of the national treasury, and how he worried about money every day. He had trouble eating and sleeping. The Ministry of War and the Imperial College were dragging the Ministry of Revenue down. Of course, he would not be so impulsive. Prince Jin was only a child who was less than 10 years old. What if he made a mistake? So, Qin Huan squatted down and began to check his calculation. Not long after, Qin Huan's breathing gradually became heavy. He looked up at the Minister of War, Yan Bing, and the people of the Imperial College. His eyes were bloodshot, like a fierce beast choosing its prey. Chapter 455. Okay, I got it. Han, go over there and play for a while. I'll be back soon. Emperor Jing helped Prince Jin up from the ground and patted the dirt off him. Although Prince Jin had become unusually well-behaved and sensible these days, he was still a child who was less than 10 years old. Emperor Jing still did not think that he could participate in these military and national affairs. Father, Li Han was not stupid. Seeing that his father did not care about the result that he had spent a lot of effort to calculate, he was immediately disappointed and anxious. How could he have made a mistake? There was a similar problem in the booklet. The 3 black-hearted shopkeepers had tortured him for several days. It was not easy for him to figure it out. How could he have made a mistake in such a simple problem? Your Highness, this is not a place for you to mess around. Leave quickly. How could they be disturbed by a naughty child when the monarch and his ministers were discussing matters? The great scholar who taught the prince's Confucian classics said with a frown. He then looked at Emperor Jing and said, Your Majesty, the art of arithmetic has been around for thousands of years. A young boy can propose the so-called new arithmetic. It is really, shut up. Before the old man finished speaking, there was a sudden shout in the hall. Everyone, including Emperor Jing, was startled. Qin Huan, the Minister of Revenue, had a bloodshot face. He stood up and looked at the old man and asked, His Majesty asked you to try and promote the new arithmetic in the Imperial College, but you rejected it? The old man was also frightened by Qin Huan's appearance. After he came to his senses, he looked at him angrily and said, Yes, you dare to call yourself new with a crooked method. The Ministry of Revenue was in charge of the country's finances. Its position was both important and awkward. For the sake of money, it often entangled with various ministries. The officials of the Ministry of Revenue hoped that the national treasury would be full and that money would never run out. At this time, Qin Huan did not care that this was the hall of diligent government. His Majesty was beside him. All he could think about was the money that had been lost. He felt that his heart was bleeding. He rushed up and grabbed the old man's collar. He said word by word, Say it again. At this moment, he didn't care about any great scholars at all. He wanted nothing more than to tear those fellows from the Directorate of Imperial Academies into pieces. Lord Qin, what are you doing? Are you crazy? Let go of old Wu. Come, Lord Qin is crazy. Qin Huan, the Minister of Revenue, who had suddenly gone mad, shocked everyone again. They were afraid that he would beat Elder Wu up like Li Xianzi. What was going on in the Imperial Palace? Could it be that something evil had happened? In just a few days, a county magistrate and a minister had gone crazy one after another. It seemed that they needed to invite a few Taoist masters to exorcise the evil. The people from the directorate hurried forward to pull the two apart, but Qin Huan refused to let go. His furious gaze sent chills down their spines. Emperor Jing recovered from the shock and quickly said, Minister Qin, what happened? Let go of old Wu first and tell me slowly. Qin Huan's breathing was heavy. After taking a few deep breaths, he slowly loosened his grip. When he turned his head, his eyes were wet as he hissed, Your Majesty, the Directorate of Directorates has harmed the country. The old man he had grabbed by the collar was tidying up his clothes, but when he heard these words, a look of rage appeared on his face as he loudly shouted, Impudent! Official Qin, you are the Minister of Revenue, yet you dare to speak such words to insult my directorate. This old man will definitely report you in court in front of all the officials. Report your mother. At this moment, Qin Huan finally understood Li Xianzi's feelings. Even though the other party was a respected scholar, he still turned his head and scolded him before kicking him. The dignified scholar of the directorate had been kicked by the Minister of Revenue. The atmosphere in the hall suddenly became a little quiet. Mad, Official Qin was really mad. The people from the directorate were so agitated that they even forgot to help Elder Wu up. The Minister of War, Yan Bing, finally revealed a shocked expression. He had never thought that Qin Huan, who had always been known as a gentleman, would have such a violent side. Yan Bing admitted defeat to beating the directorate's great scholar in front of His Majesty. Li Han sniffled and looked at the scene in front of him. He suddenly had a bad premonition. Before anyone could say anything, Qin Huan picked up the memorial and handed it to an official of the directorate. With a trace of disappointment on his face, he said, Take a look, all of you. There happened to be a professor of mathematics in the hall today. When he saw Minister Qin's appearance, he felt a chill in his heart and moved his head closer. A moment later, the professor's forehead was covered with a fine layer of sweat. He raised his head and wanted to say something, but his lips were trembling and he couldn't make a sound. Plop! The dignified professor of mathematics of the directorate collapsed to the ground with his legs weak. Professor Su, what's wrong? What happened? Say something. Professor Su, Professor Su. The official of the directorate shook Professor Su's shoulder anxiously, only to find that his face was pale and his eyes were lifeless. He didn't say a word. Minister of War Yen Bing, who was standing to the side, seemed to think of something. His face suddenly turned pale. When he looked at Qin Huan, he found that Qin Huan was looking at him with pity. His heart gradually sank into a bottomless abyss. Seeing that Emperor Jing was still a little confused, Qin Huan picked up the memorial and walked in front of Li Han. He said respectfully, Your Highness Prince Jin, please tell us again. Even if Prince Jin was young and ignorant, he knew that something big had happened. He didn't want to show off anymore and ran out of the door. Father, I suddenly remembered that Lady Mother was looking for me. I'll go back first. After running a few steps out of the hall, he was caught by the guards. Prince Jin said with some annoyance, I've written it clearly. Why can't you understand it? I don't have time to tell you again. I have to go back to eat. Today was obviously not a good time to discuss with his father about not going to the mathematics class in the future. His father and those people looked at him strangely. Prince Jin decided to run away first. Your Majesty, the method used by Prince Jin can save nearly 10,000 taels of silver just by transporting grain. I believe that County Magistrate Li's new mathematics is not only suitable for this. The officials of the directorate are doing nothing but doing nothing. They have eyes but failed to recognize Emingsu. It's a big mistake. Although Qin Huan calmed down, his tone was still angry. Han, does teacher teach you these things in class? Emperor Jing thought for a moment, looked down at Prince Jin and asked. Thinking of the difficult problems in the booklet, Prince Jin shook his head and said, This is nothing. Teacher's teaching is much more difficult than these. Emperor Jing touched his head with a smile and said, Father knows. Han, go back first. Father has something important to discuss with these officials. Li Han felt as if he had been pardoned and ran out quickly. We are guilty. When Prince Jin stepped out of the hall, all the people of the directorate knelt down and said in a trembling voice. Chapter 456. The people of the directorate, who were filled with righteous indignation and wanted to abolish the new mathematics, could only kneel in the hall and did not dare to raise their heads. The three elders, including the great scholar who was kicked to the ground by Qin Huan, the Minister of Revenue, did not kneel together, but their faces were red with shame. Their decades of reputation had been ruined. If there was a crack in the ground in front of them, they would have crawled into it. The words they used to belittle Li just now could be used on them at this moment. Apart from being frightened, they also found it hard to believe. Was the new mathematics so wonderful that it could make a 9-year-old child surpass a master of mathematics who had been immersed in it for decades? Tell me, what is your fault? After the shock, Emperor Jing's expression had calmed down. He glanced at the people kneeling on the ground and asked lightly. We should follow your Majesty's orders and should not doubt Li Xianzi's new mathematics. The Chancellor of the Directorate said in a trembling voice, the calculation method we use is not as good as County Magistrate Li's new calculation method, but what the Directorate of Directorate has obtained is the new calculation method. As for the problem of selecting the best candidate just mentioned by Prince Jin, not only I have never heard of it, but I'm afraid no one in the entire Directorate, or even the whole world, has ever heard of it. However, County Magistrate Li is indeed a genius. I sincerely ask Your Majesty to allow the Directorate of Directorate to assign 2 doctors of mathematics to study with the princes. The members of the Imperial College looked at each other for a while and then spoke up one after another. They admitted their mistakes with a sincere attitude and did not mention anything about the admonition just now. They praised the new mathematics and expressed their willingness to learn advanced techniques from Li Xianzi. In summary, the core meaning they wanted to express was that it was not that they were too useless. Everyone had been like this for decades, not only our country, but also other countries. They would not take the blame for the previous mistakes. Li Xianzi was so powerful, so it was better to promote the new mathematics as soon as possible. It was not that they did not want to take the blame, but that they could not bear it at all. According to Lord Qin, the National Treasury lost a terrifying amount of money every year. Even if the Directorate sold itself, it would not be able to pay it back. The Minister of War, Yan Bing, knelt in front of Emperor Jing. His face was ashen as he said in a deep voice, "The military expenditure was not calculated accurately. Even if I were to die 10,000 times, would not be able to atone for my sins." Emperor Jing personally helped him up. He shook his head and said, "This matter is not your fault. If we really talk about it, I am also at fault. I should have let County Magistrate Li carry out this law in detail. The Ministry of War was not responsible for this. Instead, it was the Directorate that disappointed Emperor Jing. The Directorate is to blame for not paying attention to the new school of mathematics. All officials will be fined a year's salary as punishment." Emperor Jing looked at the people of the Directorate of Studies and said, "In addition, immediately summon the mathematics professors and students of the Directorate of Studies to the palace. I want to see with my own eyes what the mathematics talents of our court are like." He trotted all the way back to his residence. Before Prince Jin Li Han had time to catch his breath, a eunuch issued an edict to summon all the princes and princesses to Bowen Hall. Prince Jin followed the eunuch nervously and saw that several princes were already waiting there. He went forward to ask about the situation and learned that his father was going to test their homework. His heart suddenly thumped. These days, he only cared about wandering in the sea of mathematics. How could he remember other homework? In addition to his brothers and sisters, there were more than a dozen strangers in the hall today. It seemed that they were going to take the exam with them. Prince Jin could not help but feel more nervous. After opening the test paper given to him by a eunuch, Prince Jin was stunned. The next moment, he showed a relaxed expression. Chicken and rabbit questions, well questions, and rope questions, these were all left over from a long time ago. It did not take him long to solve the answers. The questions at the back were a little good, but they were copied from the booklet given to him by the teacher. Even the numbers were the same. He could write them with his eyes closed. After a quarter of an hour, Li Han put down his pen. His father was watching from a distance and did not dare to do anything out of line. In boredom, he looked at the people around him. Shining Imperial Sister frowned. He must have encountered a problem that he could not solve. This was normal. The things taught by the teacher in class were actually very simple. The real hell was actually that booklet that belonged to him. Li Han still thought that the teacher punished him for bullying Yongning. Beside him, Li Mo bit the tip of his pen. It seemed that he did not even solve the first question. He deserved it. He actually dared to laugh at him for being fat. So what if he was fat? Being fat did not block his way. This time, he was going to lose face in front of his father. Li Xiang, who was next to him, also seemed to have encountered a problem. Li Xiang had always been his loyal follower, so he had to help him no matter what. He would think of a way to let him copy later so that he did not follow him in vain. What were those strangers doing? Why were their foreheads sweating? There were so many ice cubes, but the Bowen Hall was not hot at all. What a group of strange people. Just as Li Han was sitting there drowsily out of boredom, the students of the Imperial College's mathematics department were already drenched in sweat. Looking at the test paper in front of them, they only felt dizzy. Li Lei, Han Mimi, the pond, releasing water, entering water. Were these really math questions? With doubts about life, everyone only felt that even the future had become gray. in a secluded corner of the hall, Jing Emperor and the Minister of Revenue, Qin Huan, stood there with a test paper in their hands. The people of the Imperial College stood aside obediently. They had long lost their arrogance. Your Majesty, the questions that Li Xianzi has set are really brilliant. They can be used in reality. They make mathematics not just stay on paper. It can be imagined that if the new mathematics can be implemented, it will create a whole new situation. Qin Huan finally looked away from the test paper and said with admiration. As the Minister of Revenue, he was extremely sensitive to numbers and was naturally proficient in mathematics. At this moment, he finally couldn't help but speak. Jing Emperor nodded and was not too surprised. He had long been used to Li Yi, who could always create miracles and surprises. Your Majesty, 1 hour is up. Yan Bing stepped forward and reminded. Then let's go and take a look. The princes, princesses, and the mathematics students were all driven out of the Bowen Hall. Except for Prince Jean, almost all the princes and princesses were a little nervous. The questions just now were much more difficult than what they usually did in class. Some of them were even unprecedented. They didn't even move a word. This time, they would definitely be reprimanded by their father. Liamo, how did you answer? Li Xiang, how about you? Did you understand the hand gestures I showed you just now? Imperial sister, you. Oh, nothing. The red hairpin you are wearing today is so beautiful. After asking everyone, Li Han finally couldn't suppress the pride on his face. Compared to I in mathematics, you are still far behind. Not far away, several young people from the mathematics department of the Imperial College gathered together. They all had bitter faces. Brother Chen, how was it? How many of the 10 questions did you solve? I'm ashamed, I only answered 3 lines. Not bad. I only wrote 2 lines. To tell you the truth, I only solved 1. Everyone was still confused about His Majesty's inexplicable mathematics exam. Just now, when they saw the questions on the test paper, they felt like they were sitting on pins and needles. At this time, when they learned that everyone's situation was the same, they felt a little relieved. They had never heard of those questions before. Even if they couldn't answer them, it was understandable. Everyone's level was similar, so no one could laugh at each other. It was just strange why His Majesty let these princes and princesses take the exam with them. They were just some naughty children. Did they know what mathematics was? They probably couldn't even understand those questions, right? As the students were thinking about this, they suddenly saw several professors coming out of the hall. The leader of the group, Si Yi, had a gloomy expression, causing them to have a bad premonition. Chapter 457. The dignified mathematics students of the Imperial College are not even as good as the young princes. What a good Imperial College! The Minister of Revenue, Qin Huan, came out of the hall and said with a sullen face. The officials of the Imperial College lowered their heads and did not dare to say a word to refute. Today, the Imperial College lost face in front of His Majesty. It was the same exam, but the mathematics students' results were comparable to a group of 7 or 8-year-old princes. Moreover, they were left far behind by the slightly older Princess Shaning and Prince Jean. If this matter was spread out, the Imperial College would not be able to raise their heads in front of people in the future. Teacher, a student summoned up the courage to ask a doctor of mathematics. The other party coldly said with a sullen face, "Why are you still standing here? Haven't you lost face enough? Go back." The mathematics students, who were confused after being scolded, saw the faces of several teachers. They immediately did not dare to say another word and left with their tails between their legs. An incredible thought emerged in the hearts of more than a dozen people at the same time. Could it be that the little princes and princesses really solved those abnormal problems that even they could not solve? They wanted to ask, but when they saw the cold faces, they did not dare to speak. When they thought of what Minister Qin had just said, they only felt that their faces were burning in the Bowen Hall. The princes and princesses lowered their heads and surrounded Emperor Jing. They knew that their father, the emperor, would not be satisfied with this exam, so they carefully did not dare to speak. As for Prince Jin, Li Han, he raised his head high and looked at the world with disdain. As the only person who answered all 10 questions correctly, he had such confidence. Princess Shaning was the most lively. She did not seem to care at all. She put an iced grape into Emperor Jing's mouth and asked with a smile, "Father, this grape is very sweet, right?" Emperor Jing smiled, looked at the crowd and said, "Father is very satisfied with this exam. Don't stand here, go and play." The princes and princesses were relieved when they didn't hear the admonishment they had imagined. In an instant, they dispersed. Only Prince Jin, Li Han, stayed. He looked up at Emperor Jing as if he had something to say. "Han, is there anything else?" Emperor Jing looked at Li Han and asked with a smile. When Li Yi told him that Prince Jin was very talented in mathematics, he didn't care much. However, this time, he deeply realized that the former gluttonous and playful little fatty was actually taught to this degree by Li Yi. "Imperial Father, I think." Li Han was hesitating whether or not to tell his imperial father that he didn't want to attend math classes in the future. Emperor Jing once again smiled and said, "Your teacher once told imperial father that Han, is very talented in math. Han should be more diligent in the future. Perhaps imperial father will need Han's help in many areas." What? Monarch Jin was obviously shocked by the news, and he was stunned. Teacher had told father that he was very talented in mathematics. How was this possible? Teacher only knew how to torture him with those difficult questions. Why would he praise him in front of his father? Seeing that Monarch Jin was stunned, Emperor Jing touched his head and said, Okay, Han, what's the matter? Say it quickly." No. "Imperial father, I'm going out to play." This accident made him forget what he was going to say. Monarch Jin's face showed a proud expression. He grabbed a few grapes from the plate on the side and ran out of the hall. Emperor Jing smiled and watched him run away. When his eyes fell on the stack of examination papers again, his face gradually showed a thoughtful expression. "Why are you here?" Li Yi looked at Li Xian, who came in from the outside, and asked in surprise. "It's boring to stay in the prince's residence, so I came to take a look." Li Xian said casually, but he looked at the things in Li Yi's hands. He curiously asked, "What are you doing? Aren't you grounded?" Li Yi asked in confusion. "Yes." Li Xian nodded and looked at Li Yi strangely. "Does it matter?" "It doesn't matter." Li Yi shook his head. Even the world belonged to their big family. Being grounded was just a casual remark from the old emperor. It had nothing to do with whether Li Xian was in the prince's mansion or not. Li Xian looked at the rags in Li Yi's hands and lost interest in them. He ran out of the kitchen to get a pot of grape wine and moved a chair to sit next to Li Yi. He took a sip and said, "When I was a child, I was always bullied by the king of Shu. This time, I finally got revenge. If there are such good things in the future, remember to call me. Come on." Li Yi lowered his head and continued to work. He didn't even look at him. He said, "How you fight with the king of Shu is the royal family's business. If I beat the king of Shu again, who knows where my head will be. Then why were you so bold last time?" Li Xian turned to look at him. He was still very curious about this matter. Hysteria. Li Yi said in a serious tone. He then asked, "How's the activity in the court these few days?" "Nothing much." Li Xian shook his head and said, the king of Shu is not honorable himself in this matter, so those people won't make a big deal out of it. Other than the initial clamor to severely punish the two of us, no one has talked about it in the court these days. Those people. Li Yi raised his eyebrows and suddenly became interested. He asked, "Who are they?" "Who?" Li Xian looked at him and said, "Of course it's Prime Minister Qin and those officials close to the king of Shu." That day, they were also the ones who made the most noise in the court, such as the Assistant Minister of the Ministry of Rights, the Chancellor of the Directorate. "Wait a minute. What are you going to do?" Seeing Li Yi suddenly get up and walk into the room, Li Xian asked in confusion. "Get a pen and paper." After a while, seeing that Li Yi actually took out a small booklet, Li Xian was stunned. "Does anyone have anything else to report?" The morning court was about to end. Emperor Jing sat on the dragon chair and asked as usual. There were not many things worth discussing in the court today, except for the fact that the third prince of the Qi kingdom had brought a group of capable people from the Qi kingdom to stir up trouble in the capital city. They had visited all the famous Confucian scholars, causing all the Confucian scholars to feel insecure and simply shut themselves in their rooms. However, there was nothing he could do about it. He couldn't just chase them all out. After all, they didn't go overboard in their actions. They discussed knowledge openly and won fair and square. Even if there were many rumors about this among the people, the confidence that they gained from defeating the kingdom of Qi was greatly reduced. Standing at the level of the imperial court, there was no effective way to reverse or change the situation. "I have a report." The Assistant Minister of the Ministry of Rights, Chen Bo, walked out of the crowd with a ceremonial tablet in his arms. He said loudly, "I heard that the county magistrate of Chang'an, Li Yi, was ordered by His Majesty to teach mathematics to the princes. However, County Magistrate Li is only a scholar. The new mathematics that he advocated is crooked and has been rejected by the Imperial College. How can a mere scholar teach the princes? It is not in accordance with etiquette and etiquette." Assistant Minister Chen from the Ministry of Rights said a lot. The officials had different thoughts. Emperor Jing was expressionless. The Chancellor of the Imperial College's mouth twitched. He wished he could sew Assistant Minister Chen's mouth. The Imperial College had just lost face in front of His Majesty the previous day. Several mathematics professors spent the night studying the new mathematics. After all, this time it was pardonable, but if something were to happen again, it would not be just a punishment of a year's salary forfeiture. Assistant Minister Chen's words undoubtedly dragged the Imperial College out again and roasted them on the fire. You're tuning into the Journey of the Soul YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.